Good evening to everyone and welcome. Welcome to the January 9th, 2023 meeting of Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you're able to join us this evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order and ask if you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan? Mr. Duncan, are you there? I see you.
Phil?
Well, I see he's here.
We have the same issues we did before.
Are we good?
I'm here.
There you are.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
We can now.
Little technical difficulty. Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shantyscott is a little bit late. She's at her work board meeting. She will be joining us. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mayor Tarter.
Here.
And we do have a motion for electronic participation by Mr. Duncan.
All right, would someone like to make that motion?
Mayor, I'll make it.
All right.
I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Phil Duncan in this meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy on participation in meetings through electronic means as adopted by Resolution 2022-02.
All right, Mr. Duncan, can you state your location and the reason for participation by electronic means?
Here in Falls Church, isolating with a positive COVID test.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Snyder in the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's keep moving. Do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I moved it without the meeting agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Connolly on the second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. We're starting our meeting with a proclamation regarding a day of service in honor of Martin Luther King Day. Ms. Hardy was going to do the honors. So, Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Mayor. Whereas the City of Falls Church is a welcoming and respectful place for people of all faiths, all races, all cultures, all sexual orientations, and all backgrounds, and whereas the City Council wishes to reaffirm the long-standing community values of equality, inclusion, and diversity, and amplify the efforts to support those values in the year that marks the city's 75th anniversary, and whereas in numerous proclamations in support of fair housing, disability rights, immigrant rights, and the rights of the LGBTQ community, the City Council has always taken a strong stand in opposition to discrimination against anyone. And whereas the City Council encourages positive action to combat intolerance, and whereas on January 16th, 2023, we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for leading the civil rights movement in this country until his death by assassination in 1968 to advance civil rights for people of color in the United States through nonviolence and civil disobedience. And whereas Dr. King said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And each year on the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, Americans across the country answer that question by coming together to serve their neighbors and communities. And whereas service to others is a hallmark of the American character and central to how Falls Church meets the challenges faced by the city, the Commonwealth, and the nation. And whereas the Falls Church City Council believes that ordinary citizens, armed with compassion and the willingness to serve, can come together to change the world and pursue the nation's highest ideals.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby recognize the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday on January 16th, 2023 as City of Falls Church Day of Service and encourage all citizens to observe this day with appropriate civic, community, and service projects in honor of Dr. King, and to affirm our city's commitment to the values of equality, inclusion, and diversity. Thank you. All right. Let's keep moving. Do we have any oaths of office to administer, Madam Clerk?
Is there anybody here to take their Board of Commission oath of office? No, sir.
All right. Let's move on then to the receipt of public comment. Do you want to summarize the written comment?
Certainly. Robert and Sita Kennedy asked council to vote no on transition zone changes. Sean Dakin asked that a speed camera on West Broad Street discussed by Police Chief Mary Gavin be installed. Andrew Painter thanked council and staff for working with VDOT and Fairfax County to make the South Washington South Maple traffic light a reality. The following thanks council for the momentum gained on bicycle transportation improvements in 2022. David Bloomgarden, Andrew Olison of 615 Lincoln Avenue, Jan Hill of 302 Bishop's Court. Sarah Snyder sent additional signatures to a previously submitted petition opposing transition zone changes. And that was it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to turn to receipt of public comment from those who happen to be in the audience or on the internet right now. So, Madam Clerk, do you have anyone signed up to speak?
Yes, first we have Matthew Lee and followed by Ross Litkenhouse.
All right, welcome. And if you could state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
All set? Thank you. My name is Matt Lee. I live at 6818 Jackson Ave, right outside the city. I'm the owner of Lee Design Studio. We're an architecture firm based here in Falls Church and doing various projects around the city. We recently signed a lease at Pearson Square and submitted a permit to fit out that space that's been vacant for a few years. Upon submission to the permit, we received a notice of the voluntary concessions that were made with the development originally, and the current owner wasn't apparently aware of them. Neither was I submitting the permit. We're hoping to petition the city to expedite the process for special exception to allow for the space to be fit out and for us to move into that space and continue our dedication to the city and work with us on that. We should be submitting our special exception process application in the coming weeks and look forward to working with the city on how that can work for us and for the city as well.
Thank you. And just briefly, the issue is that the space is not designated as office, but as retail. Is that the
It's
issue?
limited in the amount of office that can go into the space, and we're slightly over that allowance. And yeah, we're not a retailer, so it's dedicated to retail currently.
Gotcha. Look forward to hearing more about this. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming out. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Litkenhouse, followed by Elise Bankston.
Good evening, Council. Ross Litkenhouse, 1105 Seton Lane. First, let me start that over, Celeste. Burning into my time here. Can you reset me? Oh, thank you. Good evening, Council. Ross Litkenhouse, 1105 Seton Lane. First, let me start off by saying thank you to both Council and City staff. As a constituent and taxpayer, I appreciate the heavy lifting that is being done this time of year related to fiscal planning for the city, as well as the time commitment and brain power required to successfully produce a well-crafted and thoughtful budget. So I appreciate that. I'm here tonight asking for your support of an expedited resolution to Matt Lee's conundrum. As a small business owner here in the City of Falls Church and as a member of the EDA, I feel compelled to implore this council to move quickly to address the VC covenants that are prohibiting Matt's architecture firm from opening up a physical location at Pearson Square. Over the past few decades, several mixed-use projects that were approved through the special exception process carry with them specific restrictions related to the mix of use types permitted within commercial spaces. Most recently, this collective body, as well as the EDA, have grappled with changes related to the Byram, which, if changed, would allow for expanded uses that were previously prohibited due to what I consider, speaking only for myself as a taxpayer, as possibly well-intended at the time of development, yet unnecessary, if not antiquated, use restrictions under the lens of present-day planning. And while there may have been a plausible reason for that prescriptive solution at the time, at both the Byron and Pearson Square, it runs quite contrary to the vision and spirit of what our city collectively has been trying to achieve in terms of business growth and economic development. Office uses like Lee and Associates provide valuable daytime foot traffic that drives sales for existing businesses. And in that particular section of town along South Washington, we have had a challenging time attracting any commercial businesses to occupy chronically vacant space over the past 10 years. Matt's professional services firm will pay gross receipts tax to the city. That gross receipts tax rate for this business, for his business, will be 2.5 times that of a retail merchant that he is being told must occupy that same space. Moreover, the rent that he pays will increase the overall rental revenue received by the owner of Pearson Square, which, all things being equal, should increase the overall real estate taxes produced from that building. Sure you want to do this? Yeah. I'm asking that the council please prioritize a reconsideration of the specific VC provision related to Pearson Square, which will allow a successful Falls Church homegrown business to expand and occupy brick and mortar space. Let's please not diminish a rising economic tide due to covenants that are no longer practically needed. Please find a place to put this on your council agenda and move it through to a final vote as quickly as possible so we can give Matt's business a chance to survive and thrive here in the city. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, are there other, oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Ms. Conley has a question.
This is just, I guess, for Mr. Lee, for Mr. Shields. I just want to make sure that there's a clear process that he's able to follow to make this happen, and you're fully aware of what you need to do and the steps to follow to make this happen, to come before us, right? Okay.
All right. Any, Ms. Hardy?
While we're on this topic, Mr. Shields, since this is now the second request we've had for 2 projects, it's probably worth just revisiting the old SEs that we've had for mixed-use projects over the years so we understand what the landscape is, all the VCs that we've inherited so we understand the restrictions. I don't think we need to make wholesale changes across the board, but I think at the minimum we should probably understand what those old VCs say and be prepared for what implications they could.
Okay, we can, so first and foremost, staff will work with Mr. Lee just to make sure that there's a real clear process and in terms of making his case before the City Council for the amendment as described by Mr. Lee. We can produce a report just to do a review of all of the commercial voluntary concessions that govern their ground floor uses, and we could provide that to the City Council as well.
Great. And since Phil's not here, if he's open to it, we can talk about an EDC as a kind of first step.
Sounds fine to me.
Thank you, Phil.
Can I add
Madam
something?
Clerk?
Can I add one thing to
Yes.
that? So beyond just knowing what they all are, it's more of a, not only what they are, but are there some that are more at risk of being changed, right? I mean, some of them have been continually filled from the time they started, and that doesn't seem to be a problem. There are others that really seem to be at risk of, if we change the spectrum and then we change Pearson Square, someone else may come in and ask for change. And who are those that are the most at risk? That shouldn't be too hard to figure out, but if you look at, some of them have never been able to fill their space, and they may start to come to us and say, well, time to change for us too.
All right, Madam Clerk, other speakers?
Yes, we have Elise Bankston from the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce, followed by Thomas Wotka.
All right, welcome.
Good evening, thank you. I'm here just to speak on behalf of the businesses with outdoor dining. Thank you. Okay, Elise Nobankson. I'm here on behalf of the Falls Church Chamber at 417 West Broad. I'm here to just express great thanks to you all for supporting our businesses during the emergency with outdoor dining. That has been very beneficial to our members, I think also to the city, and I'm aware that there has been a review with a process that will be determined most likely March 1st or thereabouts. So I'm here to express thanks and hope that to any extent possible we can continue the arrangement that's out there. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Our last speaker is Thomas Wodka.
Welcome.
Yes. Hi, my name is Thomas Watka. I am a high school student at Meridian. I live at 707 Poplar Drive. I'm a student in one of the classes offered at our high school called IB Global Politics, and one of the parts of one of our final projects called the IA is that we have to do a political action activity. And through my research, I've done extensive research on NGOs and the benefits that they provide to keeping a democracy and keeping a state legitimate. And through my research, I realized that the NGO presence in Falls Church is not that it's limited, but it's that there isn't much of an NGO presence in Falls Church, and that just kind of started to get my mind going. And so this is when I landed on speaking to City Council as my political action activity. And so I was just wondering and curious as since NGOs are so beneficial to democracies and keeping a state legitimate and helping a local government through not only benefiting citizens but keeping the government aware of what the citizens would want and what the citizens need. I was just curious of how Falls Church does NGOs and what benefits that they have and what programs that they have.
All right. Well, that's a good question. I think Dave Snyder's going to answer it. So.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for asking that question. Your fundamental hypothesis of the value of NGOs is absolutely spot on, based upon what I know from both international, federal, state, and now local activities. Your question was specifically directed to Falls Church. The reality is we have a huge network of NGOs that provide policy advice and provide services to our citizens, which are in addition to and sometimes more expansive than the city's able to provide. Particularly our faith community provides a huge number of human services, including daycare, all kinds of things like that. Other NGOs, for example, Welcoming Falls Church, provide services to immigrants. The Tinner Hill Foundation has helped bring alive a critical part of our city's history and is an important part of our civil rights activities. So the NGOs are very much embedded in the fabric of serving our community in so many, many different ways. So thank you for raising the question, and I know others may comment. I've just begun to mention some of the NGOs that are active here and providing fundamental services to our citizens in addition to those provided. And of course, we have all kinds of boards and commissions with citizen volunteers who provide us expertise and guidance on a whole range of issues. So thanks a lot for the question. And NGOs are an absolutely fundamental part of our civil society here in the City of Falls Church. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right, we've got Ms. Connolly would like to add a bit to that.
I'll just add that the person who spoke right before you, Elise Neal Bankston, is the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, which is another NGO. We call them nonprofit organizations in Falls Church, so maybe that nomenclature. We don't usually say NGO in a local organization. Additionally, the Human Services Advisory Committee gives out about $70,000 a year in grants to nonprofit partners who are doing things in the human services arena to help people. So it could be everything from Best Buddies to students who are elderly adults who need someone to read the newspaper aloud to them, or legal services or homeless services, and even people who need rides to doctor's appointments. So there are a lot of those nonprofit organizations that the city partners with.
All right, thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good day. Oh.
One more, Ms. Hiscott has something.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure that my colleagues were waiting for me to mention that one very important nonprofit organization in the city is also the Falls Church Education Foundation, which I happen to be the executive director of, and have had a great conversation with one of your classmates who's also doing their IB Gov IA about nonprofits and their support of public education, which I'm happy to have a discussion with you two offline if that helps with your IA project as well. So thank you.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much, and have a good night.
All right. Thank you so much for coming out. Good luck with all your schoolwork. All right, are there any other speakers, Madam Clerk? Okay, if not, next up is, excuse me?
There are no more speakers signed up this evening.
Gotcha, but we do have someone waiting in the wings who's starting to head forward. Ms. Ryberg, thank you for coming out this evening for your fine work on behalf of the city. And we look forward to your report from the Retirement Board.
Should I move this? All right. Thank you, Mayor Tarter. So yes, hi, I'm Connie Rydberg. I'm the chair of the Retirement Board, and I know I've presented here several times, but I'll just do a quick reintroduction. My day job, so I am the Retirement Board chair, and but my day job is working as an actuary and a consultant to corporate pension plans, and I've been doing that for about 30 years. It's a little different from the government plans that the city has here, but a lot of the concepts are the same, and so I can transfer a lot of that knowledge to the work that we do here. And I've also been on the Retirement Board for over 10 years. So, as a little bit of background before I jump into the report, the Retirement Board for FY22 oversaw 3 retirement plans, 2 pension plans, and something called the OPEB. So the first retirement plan is the basic pension plan that covers government employees and school employees who are not covered by VRS, Virginia Retirement System. The police pension plan covers the police department, and then the OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which is retiree medical and retiree life insurance, covers government employees, school employees, and the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy. So now moving into the report, there are 2 main sections to this report. There's the financial information, which I'll go through in a bit more detail, and then there's the administrative section, which I'll just highlight a few items and then welcome questions during the question time on the remainder. So the first section, the chart in line 11, is a summary of the market value of assets that the Retirement Board had oversight for in FY22. These figures come from our investment consultant, ANCO. As I'm sure you all know, FY22 was a tough year in the stock market. The S&P 500 was down about 11% during FY22. Some of the other equity markets, the mid-cap, the small-cap, international emerging markets, all were down somewhere between 17 and 25%. So it was a rough year. Now remember that FY21 was a great year, so we have good years and we have not so great years. So that gives a little perspective on the numbers that you're going to see that you see in this chart. I'm going to go back down to the OPEB. That plan of about $17 million had a return in FY22 of minus 13.4%. That plan is about 80% in equities and 20% in bonds. So, and that's a passively managed fund, mostly passively managed assets, so that sort of explains where that landed. Our 5-year return, however, has been 6.7%. That's the average over the 5 years, and that puts us in the top 20 percentile of results for plans that have similar investment mixes. The basic plan and the police plan are invested a little bit differently, and they have better returns for FY22, still negative, minus 8.6, but better than the OPEB. Part of that is the investment mix. It's only 70% in equities, 15% in bonds. Real estate was 10% of our assets. That returned 32%, positive 32% to the fund for the year. A small portion, but a good result, and 5% in infrastructure, which was about positive 10% for the fiscal year. So all total, minus 8.6% for the fiscal year, 5-year average 8.2 or 8.0, and that puts us in about the top 5% of retirement plans and similarly invested. Moving down to the table in line 18. Now we're switching over to funded status of the plan, and this information is provided to us by Siegel, our actuary. And I'm going to focus on the last 2 columns. Siegel's numbers, they look at things a little bit differently. They are smoothing when they look at funded status, which compares liabilities to assets. They are smoothing the assets. So that means last year's FY21's great returns weren't all recognized last year, but they are slowly being recognized over 5 years. And similarly, this fiscal year's poorer asset returns will be recognized over 5 years. So we sort of smooth out the ups and downs so we get a more stable result. And you can see for all three plans that the funded status between over the last 2 years have been fairly steady. All right, moving on. The table in line 22. So this is the water sale money. And as a refresher, back in 2015, during the sale of the water system, $9.2 million of those proceeds were deposited into the pension plan. The intent was to create an endowment where the principal stays within the plan. The city has the use of the investment earnings to basically reduce contributions that would have otherwise been required, use that reduction to pay for other projects in the city. There are a lot of details and complexities in there, but we have an administrative manual that covers those details and has served us quite well for the last 7 years. Some of the details are around, so the city's use of the investment earnings is smoothed over 5 years so that we don't have the big ups and downs, but we sort of smooth it out and much more steady. There is a maximum of $825,000 that can be transferred into sort of for the city's use. Generally, the city has used about $640,000 a year. The difference between what is allocated to the city and what the city uses is put in a reserve fund, the city's reserve account. So now going on to the numbers that are below. So we started in July 1st, 2015 with $9.2 million. As of June 30th, 2022, the principal is $9.4 million. The city's reserve account is $2.7 million for a total of $12.1 million of water sale money in the plans. The principal is invested with the remainder of the retirement assets, so it's invested for the long term. The city's reserve account is put in cash because it is intended to be a short-term investment. Over the 7 years, not only has the principal increased, not only do we have the city's reserve account, but the city has used some of that money over those 7 years to reduce contributions. So in total, we've got an increase in principal of $0.2 million. Reserve account is currently $2.7 million, and the amount that the city has used is also $2.7 million. So a benefit to the city over 7 years of $5.6 million, averages over 7 years of $800,000 a year. At this point, I always like to remember and honor Ira Kalin, who really was the brainchild of this idea and pushed it forward, and very grateful to him. The city is very grateful to him for all of those efforts. All right, so moving on now to the administrative section of the report. I'm just going to highlight a few things. On line 42, we highlighted that the City Council has approved that the Retirement Board will take over oversight of the savings plan for the employees, and we anticipate that that will be a significant focus for the Retirement Board in 2023. Moving on to line 62. We have, over a multi-year period, have clarified and provided increased documentation for the OPEB plan, the legal structure, the plan provisions, the roles of the city as the plan sponsor, the other employers participating, the Retirement Board, the plan administrator. So we're in a really good place, and the City Council approved those documents in November. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is on line 78. So the Retirement Board has undertaken a journey of reviewing all of our contracted services. In calendar year 2022, we reviewed the contract for our custodial services and some benefit administration. So custodial services is the organization that holds the assets for the plans, and the benefit payment services would be paying the retirees their benefits. So we have rewarded that contract. We've consolidated our custodial provider to one provider, so that simplifies a lot of the administration. That also reduced our cost. And we have a new provider for making the payments to the retirees. That's going to be improved services for the retirees, that they'll now have online access to their information. They can make changes online as well as what they currently do, which is make phone calls. It will be a change for the retirees, but we will be following the provider's transition plan, and the retirees will be notified once the transition date is finalized. The remainder of the administrative report here really covers routine activities of the retirement board, other than the ESG investing, which is a separate memo, so I won't cover that now. I do want to note in line 230, we've listed our membership of the retirement board. We do have one vacancy currently, but we are excited that we have a person on the consent agenda for today, Mathann Jackson. She comes with investment experience with a large retirement plan, so we look forward to your approval of her appointment to the retirement board. All right, moving on. The next attachment is the 2023 work plan. I will not go through any of those, but will welcome any questions you have. And then attachment number 2 is a report on our investment looking at environmental, social, and governance screening or perspective on our investments. So last year when I was here, the City Council asked us to look into what would it take to divest our assets from fossil fuels. And at the time, we talked about the complexities of the retirement plan. For example, we invest the money in funds, not in individual stocks. So anytime we would need to divest, it would be divesting an entire fund, not just divesting from one individual stock. Probably most important is that our fiduciary duty is to the participants, and every decision that we make has to be in the sole benefit of participants. The third complexity was that the Department of Labor was coming out with regulations to govern how fiduciaries could reflect ESG factors in their investment decisions. The good news is the DOL published their final regulations in late November of 2022. We're still digesting that and trying to understand what that means, but in line 36, we've given a very high-level summary of what their guidance indicates. First point is, first and foremost, for fiduciaries, we must primarily consider, our first focus must be on the risk-reward attributes of our investment choices. So that has to be our primary focus. They did indicate that we could consider the economic impact of climate change on future investment results as part of that risk-reward trade-off. The retirement board does not believe that they have the expertise, however, to make some of those predictions. So we are focused on return-reward assessment of our investment choices. The second main point, though, is on lane 41. We can use ESG factors as a tie-breaking standard. So if we find two investment types, let's say we're looking at a large cap fund, if we find that there are two or more investment funds that we perceive to be relatively equal in their risk-reward trade-off, then we can consider other factors in our deliberation and our selection of those investments. The third point is that in line 44 is that in the defined contribution plan, we do have more flexibility, that the DOL will allow more consideration of what they call non-financial preferences in making our decisions about our investments, particularly if we believe that accommodating participants' preferences is expected to lead to greater participation and higher deferral rates. With that guidance, I'm going to scroll back up. Thank you for following along with me. Line 8 is our recommendation. So our recommendation is that we follow the DOL guidance. We consider risk-reward trade-offs as our primary factor, but that we do use the ESG considerations as our secondary or tiebreaker consideration. And as well, there's a lot still going on in the industry and understanding what does this mean, what does it mean practically, how do we implement this? So we will continue to monitor what are the understandings and the implementation of these, of the guidance. With that, I will scroll forward. We do have some information in this memo as well about where we stand currently. So I will tell you that we've had various conversations with ANCO, our investment consultant, about what exposure do we have. And we've gotten several different perspectives and different ways to measure the impact of our investments. The most recent one that they've provided is from Morningstar, and they look at two things. One is what they call the fossil fuel investment, and that's defined in line 60. That is not just like ExxonMobil is an oil company. It includes companies like Amazon, because Amazon uses fossil fuels to deliver their goods. It includes manufacturing to the extent that they would use fossil fuels and give off greenhouse gases to manufacture their goods. So that is what they define as fossil fuel involvement. Offsetting that, or as a separate factor, is the carbon solution involvement. So that's looking at what part of the portfolio is involved in renewable energy, green transportation, and other similar initiatives. Obviously, higher there is better. So in line 81, there is a summary of our current investments and Morningstar's assessment of the fossil fuel involvement, as well as the carbon solution involvement of each of those funds. So you've got our pension plan at the beginning, or excuse me, at the top, and then the OPEB in the last few lines. From a practical perspective,
so if we just scroll down a little beyond 81 so we can see that chart. Thank you.
Give you a second to take that in. And then the last thing on this memo is just some information. We did this year make a change in one of our funds, one of our international funds. And so we sort of test drove this process. The information that we got from ANCO was focused on the return reward assessment of these different options that were listed here on line. Can you scroll down to line 87, 88? Yes, those. So Templeton was our current investment at the time, and we consider these others as alternatives. The vast majority of the conversation within the retirement board was the risk-reward trade-off of the different options and the things that we look for, which is good returns, but defending in bad markets. We did consider this information as a secondary factor, and we were pleased to see we ended up choosing Transamerica, and I would assess that that's probably a better balance than Templeton, but in the end, our focus was on the risk-return trade-off because, again, that's our fiduciary responsibility. So with that, that is the end of my remarks, and I welcome questions.
All
Or
right,
I'm
well-
going to get my water.
Get your water, and we want to thank you and the rest of the board for the great work you all have done and this thorough presentation and your mastery of this very complicated matters on behalf of our citizens and our employees. Let's go to questions. So we'll start with Ms. Leon.
Thank you, Ms. Freiberg. I always enjoy listening to you speak on this because it's like you learn a thing or two, right? Question on the frequency of your asset allocation studies. Are they every 2 years, or how frequently is that done? I see it on the work plan for November.
So the last few years, we've done it once a year because, so I think 2020, 2021, 2022, we look at that once a year. We looked at it once a year just because the outlook of the investment professionals was changing so dramatically. The most recent one that we looked at we assessed that we were in a good place. So yes, every 2 years we'll look at the asset allocation now.
Got it. And if, wonderful to hear around, the thoughtful write-up around the approach for incorporating the ESG components of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we're looking at these two Morningstar kind of indexes. Are you looking to kind of get more sophisticated in terms of certain thresholds? Or is there an industry recommended kind of target or average for that index? Like what's
good?
Is 5.9%, there's some high ones here, like 33.7% for Lazard, but are they like in the 96th percentile of all investments? Is 33.7 like really, really high? Like I'm trying to understand what the range is, right? Or is the average, what is the average for that index? Is it
Yeah,
like
so it's
15?
So I don't know what the average is, and we can ask. This is a very evolving sort of assessment, and even earlier in 2022, the best information ANCO could give us was very different. It was just a score, A, B, C kind of, and now we're getting more numerics. So it's really evolving, and we're all trying to understand what the metrics mean, what is good, what's not so great. You specifically, pointed to some numbers on this chart. Lazard is infrastructure. So
They have a higher.
they have a higher fossil fuels. And there is some commentary in the memo around, we do hope with technology improvements that will come down. And then we have like Summit Creek. So the investment style is listed in the second column. Summit Creek is U.S. small cap, and they have no fossil fuel investment. So it's going to vary very much by
the investment style.
The investment style. Did you have something you wanted to add?
The only thing I wanted to maybe reinforce is that there are no clear definitions and metrics, and so it's very different. And so I support the Retirement Board's cautious but steady look at this. I think the other piece that the chair just brought up, where one's infrastructure and one's a different, that gets back to the importance of our diversity and the loyalty and prudence to the risk management return. So we wouldn't shift theoretically, fortunately, the regs still say it's secondary, but you wouldn't switch to everything that's zero fossil fuel, because then we won't have compliance with the rest of the asset allocation policy. So I think that's an important thing as we move forward as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very thorough.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you so much for the years that you've put in for the benefit of the city and the other members of the board. I certainly agree with the focus on your fiduciary responsibility. And I'm interested in, do you see this as sort of an ongoing review of investments as you look at investments from time to time, that you're also looking at how to improve their ESG performance? Is this something that's kind of now built into your work plan on a regular basis whenever you look at these, whenever you're looking at the underlying investments?
Yeah, so I anticipate we will continue to get more information, like you said, hopefully maybe some percentiles will come out and we'll have a better sense of where we are. I do want to emphasize that our focus is on risk reward. So when we get an assessment of our, quarterly, we get a report. How are our investments doing? What's the return? How is the return ranked for each of our investment funds? Mm-hmm. And it is when we see that something is not performing very well that I would anticipate, a bit bigger, deeper dive into some of these ESG. So as we sort of like you see here in line 87, when we were ready to change our international fund, then we pulled up this information in more depth. Now, like I said, we've been getting periodic ESG reports from our investment consultant as well, more on a monitoring basis. For here, it was more used as a secondary point of information in making our choice.
So what I'm hearing is that this is looking at ESG issues is not a one-time thing, but rather it's part of your ongoing work to maintain a high-quality, financially sound retirement system. That's what I hear you saying. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Snyder, could I add just one thing? Sure. I do want to highlight in the ESG, there's an S and a G for social and governance, and even E for environment's much broader than fossil fuel and carbon solutions. So we are looking at sort of a narrow view of ESG right now, and that's really the only thing that's really out there that's measurable. So eventually there may be some more look at social and how that's given back to the community and the governance for these investments. So I just wanted to highlight we're really focused so far and tonight on the E part of ESG.
Right. So thanks a lot. I just note that one of the investments of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority was a $10 million green bond. They looked at it and the returns were very sound and better. So anyway, I'm encouraged that you'll continue to look at these factors, putting, of course, the soundness and the returns for the benefit of the appropriate parties, number one. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. As my colleague said, Ms. Ryberg, every time you come up here, we learn something new. And what's especially impressive is that you guys only meet 4 times a year, and you get so much done for us. So we are very grateful for that. Thank you.
They are long meetings.
Thank you for bearing through those. So on the ESG point, I think as one of the people who kind of made that request a year ago, thank you for giving it very thorough consideration. As Mr. Snyder said, I hope this is not the end of the conversation, because I do think that as this evolves, let's hope to revisit this. We probably will get better at thinking through this. I just read an article from Bloomberg that I know that the top 10 ESG funds in the U.S. did perform worse than the S&P 500. So I know that that's an issue in this past couple years, but that's something let's keep an eye on, because I don't want this to be the end of that conversation. That said, it's also something we need to monitor at the state level. It's probably not going to happen in Virginia the next few years while we've got the current administration, but in other states, California, Maine, and New York, I just saw, among others, are mandating that their localities actually divest. And so this is something that we should probably keep an eye on, is we may not get a choice at some point. And so it's something that we should be prepared for as well. So thank you for all the good work.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Mr. Duncan has his hand up. Phil?
Thank you. I want to agree with my colleagues that we're very fortunate to have Ms. Rydberg and her colleagues deploying their volunteer energy and expertise to the city. Connie, I wanted to just run back for a second to the water sale proceeds and the off-throw every year. I think you said it was something in excess of $500,000 or $600,000. Is that right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch that.
The annual benefit of the water sale, as shown in the chart where you say annually, it throws off about, I forget what you said, $600,000 or $700,000. Is that what the number was?
Yeah, the average benefit to the city over the 7-year period is about $800,000. The city has used for the last several years $640,000 a year. to offset other costs. And what they haven't used, that the fund may have thrown off, has gone into the city reserve account. So it's not lost, it's just set aside for another rainy day.
Good. I certainly want to give credit to those who are no longer with us. Mr. Kalen's idea was to dedicate some of the water sale proceeds to the pension fund. And I did want to make note that Ms. Connolly was a leader in the effort at that time to make it very transparent that annually a certain amount of money would accrue to the benefit of the city's taxpayers. And that has proven to be the case, to the tune of at least a penny or a penny and a half on the tax rate, according to your numbers there, 640, 800, somewhere in that ballpark. And that's just an important little fiscal footnote in the city's history that every year, we did sort of create an endowment that every year has accrued to the benefit of not only programs, but also the effort to keep our taxes reasonable. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I think we'll all, once again, say thank you to you and appreciate the fine work and look forward to more of it to come. But appreciate you coming out this evening and the board's work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move on to council requests. We do have a full agenda and a work session tonight, I'll remind everyone, so we need to keep moving. Any council requests? Okay, okay.
Mr. Shields, could you talk about the day of service plan so that all of council is aware?
Well, we have an opportunity, and we can just communicate this with council by email to follow up, but an opportunity with the faith community to do an act of service on Martin Luther King Day in the afternoon. So we'll get the details out to you on that and see if council members can participate in that. Did you want to go into more detail on it? But it was a...
Everyone has a heads up. That's something that we've done in the past. I think it doesn't conflict with the day's activity.
So you said it's the afternoon?
Yeah, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock.
Okay.
All right, other council requests. Okay, well, let's move on to the library board presentation, or the library project presentation. I know we were just over there and saw how beautiful and well done the project was, but we'd welcome to hear a little bit more here in our public forum. Who's going to be making that presentation, Mr. Shields?
So what we'll do with the council tonight, and we do have representatives of the Library Construction Oversight Committee in the room as well, and so I'm going to turn it over to our project manager, Lionel Millard, and he will walk us through a report. And as the mayor just noted, we did have a tour with the council members in the LCOC just prior to this meeting, and I had a good discussion there. The project did come under the budget that the city council approved when just prior to construction beginning, and so Mr. Millard, let me turn it over to you for your report.
Thank you, Wyatt. Good evening, council. I'm Millard. I'm the project manager for the Mary Riley Stiles addition and renovation project, and I'm here to present the final report. These reports are something that I have conducted on a monthly basis with the LCOC committee, which was made up of residents, library board members, and some council members, and so this will be the final one. So I'm ready to get started. Who's going to pull up the spreadsheet?
I think it's merged in. Oh, you just have to scroll down. Okay.
There you go. All right, so I'm going to keep this pretty high level. I'm going to give you guys the quick points. I'm going to start with the schedule. So we executed a notice to proceed and signed the contract with Centennial Contractors back in March of 2020 with an original substantial completion date of May 23rd, 2021, and a final completion date a year later. So throughout the course of the project, we issued several time extensions, all of which were due to adverse weather. Most of these took place in the summertime when we were doing site work, such as excavating or concrete or the structural steel of the new addition. These 7 weather delays increased the project timeline by about 31 days. And one of the key points that I want to point out is that when we executed this notice to proceed with Centennial Contractors, depending on who you ask, it was either the best timing or the worst timing in the world, because as soon as we executed this contract, about a month later, the world began to shut down due to COVID-19. And one of the things I want to make sure that I emphasize is that the project team at this point, I didn't want to tell Jenny or anybody else this, but there was a serious moment where we thought that the contractor was going to actually execute their force majeure clause in the contract, pretty much because of the COVID-19 and it being a situation where obviously no one saw this coming. And the only problem is that we didn't realize how bad COVID was until we had pretty much demoed the whole building. I mean, I was just looking at my progress photos, and around April or May 1st, I believe the entire building had been destroyed. There wasn't any more interior finishes left. The whole hillside had been dug out. All the trees were gone. I mean, we were left with pretty much a skeleton of a library. And so I remember Robert Almond, who was one of the principal in charges for Centennial, calling me one weekend, trying to calm me down because I was very concerned about that. And he had made some calls with the subcontractors, and we had talked to some vendors for the long lead items, such as the windows and the HVAC equipment, stuff that needs to be made in factories. And he got reassured by his vendors that they would still be able to supply us with the material and the subs would still be able to work on the project, so we were able to move forward. And so anyways, only having time extensions due to weather, I feel like is a critical thing here due to the circumstances. So anyways, we're going to move on to financials. So another point of emphasis is that we only had 45 change orders issued for this project, and then of those 45 change orders, we had 145 potential change orders that were packaged within those documents, and the change orders could be anywhere from 1 PCO to 10, and the majority of the change orders, or not majority, but I would say about 80% of them resulted in cost increases, whereas the other 20% were credits or change orders issued due to those weather delays, since we had to track those contractually to the change orders as well. So not every single PCO was a cost increase for this project. So the original contract amount that was ordered or awarded to Centennial was about $7.8 million. And so with the contract increase due to change orders, their final contract amount was $8.1 million, which resulted in about a 3.14% contract amount increase due to change orders. And again, that's another point of emphasis that anything under 5 in an industry standard is actually very, very good. I would have been happy with it, anything under 10. So the fact that we only had a 3.14% contract increase was, I consider, a success. So the CM contingency amounts for both CM and owner contingency, we had about $313,000 for each one. At the end of the project, we had about $160,000 of CM contingency remaining, and we negotiated. And this is also a little funny story because when we were doing negotiations, obviously we were trying to bring the budget down when we were doing the pre-construction negotiations. And one of the things that we had offered up to the contractor was that we wouldn't do an 80-20 split. We would actually let them keep the entire CM contingency amount that was remaining. But they didn't want to do that because we were trying to get them to lower their fee and their general conditions, which were substantially more in their defense. So I could see why they didn't want to make that trade. But in the end, as you can see with the 80-20 split, the city received an additional $128,000 back into our project fund. And then, so as of today, we have about $160K remaining. So we did come within that budget that we originally said we would, which I believe was about $10.9 million. And yeah, that's really all I have. I mean, we can go down and continue to look at some of the more detailed spreadsheets. I'm not going to go into too much depth, with these. But as you can see, the amounts in the left column were the amounts awarded to Centennial, the construction manager at risk, and the columns in the right is what we ended, or were the final numbers. So the contract or the cost of construction increased to $6.6 million. Their general conditions obviously didn't stay the same, and that's also a key point because when your general conditions stay the same based off of this contract, that means that we didn't give them any or schedule increases that resulted in additional time for the contractor. Because if you do an owner add scope and it's a time impact to their schedule, they are entitled to additional general conditions, which we had no change orders that resulted in that. Their fee went up because there were owner changes, and I think their fee percentage was something low, like 3%. So of the change order amount, their fee did go up with like $17,000, something like that. Bonds and insurance stayed the same. And then the CM contingency, actually the wording on that one is wrong. The $160,000 is how much was remaining. I said that's the amount spent there, or amount paid out, but it's the amount remaining of that $313,000. And then as I said in the first page, their total contract amount that we closed out with was $8.1 million. I didn't do the math in my head, but I think that's like $250,000 of total for their contract increase. And then if we want to keep going, now I'm really not going to get too much in depth, but these were the big or high level items as far as like the overall budget that we originally came to you with. So you can see the biggest cost was for the construction manager at risk, Centennial, with 8.1. The next biggest contract was the engineers and the architect with BKV. And then the library furniture, which some of you guys were able to see while you were over there. And then you can see the rest of the other big expenses for this project. Keep going. And then I just wanted to give you guys a high-level look at all the change orders that we issued. And then I said PCOs at the beginning. So each one of these change orders had various amounts of potential change orders in them. And again, they're potential because not every single change order that we issued resulted in a dollar amount. Some of them were voided, some of them were credits, and some of them were time extensions. And so you can just look through this and see how the money kind of flowed. Everything in red is either a credit or a buyout savings. And I want to give Centennial credit on that aspect. So some of those buyout savings, you can see like the top one was like $139,000. I think you'll see another one here for like $95,000. That was due to them and their ability to negotiate with their subs. So we were able to get some money back into the CM contingency pot through that. And keep going. So, yeah, that's my quick rundown.
That's great. We much appreciate it. Ms. Carroll, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Sorry.
I know not everybody made it over to the library tour, but once again, I would just like to reiterate how proud I am of this project, and especially of how Lionel handled the construction portion of the project, and as along with all of the staff that did a lot of hard work during this time period as well, and all during COVID. So, we're very happy with the building. We are getting a lot of positive feedback from patrons who come into the building. As I said in the tour, a lot of people comment on how we were able to keep the coziness and the warmth of the other building present in the new building while also modernizing the building as well. So I'm very, very happy with the project.
Thank you. It was a very nice tour, and the building really is the heart of this community in a lot of ways for a lot of folks. So we think it turned out, or at least I think it turned out beautifully. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions and comments from folks. Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. And, another round of thanks to you both and to the entire team for the project and the transition, and especially under the circumstances. I just had a minor question, actually. The balance of about $160,000, the balance of the project, how can that be used? Or what are the opportunities or restrictions?
So the opportunities, I think, are sort of with, I think with every project, you have some things that are left over that you'd like to take care of, one of which is part of the heating and cooling system that was original to the building that we would like to replace. Also, redoing the dumpster enclosure that is behind the building. And there was one other thing.
The humidifier?
The humidifiers that are original to the building as well.
Do we have an
That could
estimate?
be all done within that $160,000?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Connolly?
So as one of the representatives on the Library Construction Oversight Committee, there are just a couple of people I want to recognize. This committee existed because another deceased former member of council, Mr. Dan Z., insisted that he would not vote for the project unless there was this oversight committee. So that is why it was formed. So thanks to Mr. Z for that. And then Ms. Hiscott took Mr. Z's place when she joined council. So she also was a member of that. But we also had a community member on this project, and that was Mr. Howard Reel. And he was a retired construction manager who brought his considerable lifelong expertise to this committee and worked with Lionel with him on some of the things that Mr. Reel had as his experience that he brought to this project. So I'd like to thank Mr. Reel and Lionel for working together on that a lot. And also Jenny and Lionel for working as a team. You had not worked together on a project before, and you did a great job. It came out well, and thank you for keeping the LCOC informed as well as anyone else who was interested. And one question about the CMAR process. If I remember correctly, this is the first time that we use this process, the CMAR? Is that right, Mr. Shields? And
City Hall. City Hall was.
Oh, that's it. City Hall was a CMAR, and it didn't work so well. So the library was a CMAR, and it worked better.
Yeah.
So is this a process you would recommend the city using in the future? And what were some of the tweaks that you made to make sure that it worked?
Actually, yes, I would recommend the CMAR construction process because it holds a contractor accountable. And if I had to recommend one thing that you would do differently is that make sure that you don't go to the CMAR for pricing unless you have 100% construction drawings. I think that was the biggest factor between City Hall and the library.
Thanks. So that's one of those good lessons learned to put down in our book of lessons learned.
And I think just to add to that would be getting all of the other departments involved that we did get involved for the library project. So we brought on Department of Public Works, the police department, fire marshal, IT, all came into the process pretty early on in the project. So I would recommend that as well.
So that city collaboration is important as well, because you're bringing in a lot of experts, all of whom have some involvement in the building, either in the use of it or the building of it.
Correct.
Very good. Thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if this might be a good photograph opportunity, the conclusion of a major project like this. Bring the folks, and I know there are a couple library board folks, if they'd like to come up. Would it be good? Sure. Yeah. Sure.
All right, why don't we go ahead and finish questions, and then we'll go ahead and get a photo.
So then, as I'm looking, I forgot to mention that Molly Novotny was a representative, as well as Jeff Peterson also were on that committee. Sorry that I didn't mention you at first.
All right, other questions? Vice Mayor Hardy?
Great, thank you. Along with lines of what Ms. Connolly said, I love this closeout, so thank you for doing it. I feel like we should do this for every large CIP project because I think the cost transparency, I think, is important, as well as lessons learned. Besides kind of the CMAR recommendation, are there other kind of lessons learned from this? Like, what else do we take away that you think would be helpful for other future large projects we take on?
I think this might be my personal opinion because I've worked in both the private and public sector now for construction management, and I think that having an owner's rep that is very involved not only in the pre-construction and bidding process but also the actual construction management process is huge. I mean, I had the luxury of, I'm a city resident, so I can be close to the project, but I was there every day for hours and hours. And there was a couple times where we had issues come up that had I not had the relationship that I did with the contractor, not spend as much time on site as I did, like a lot of the issues were resolved quickly and with not too big of a financial hit because of the timing and the amount of time that I was able to spend with the GC and the construction manager at risk. So being available and being like willing to deal with the architect and the engineer on a daily basis and the contractor on a daily basis is huge, because a lot of those change orders that you saw were a lot higher than what were on that page, but due to my ability to negotiate and actually catching them early on, they were able to be cheaper.
So you, as the CIP project manager, essentially served as the owner's representative, and we didn't
Yes.
have a separate body for that.
Yep, I was the owner's rep.
Got it. And I think in the high school project, we hired a separate firm actually to be the owner's rep. Is that right?
Yeah.
And obviously that was a very big project, so. And then I guess a money question. So you said all in, we were at 10.8, 10.9 million from beginning to end.
Yep.
And I remember, and I should know the answer to this, I think the referendum amount in 2016 was 8.7. Did we pay for this along the way with other funds that were not borrowed then? Wyatt, do you remember?
I'll need to go back and identify exactly how we closed that gap. I don't exactly recall.
Yeah, that would be important, because I think I was trying to get the numbers to match up, and I looked it up, and the referendum was 8.7.
I feel very confident that it was cash, because we did not issue any debt beyond what the voters approved, and so the difference was made up with cash reserves.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my memory too. It came out of either year-end surplus or.
I know, I was there for all these votes,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
should remember this, but thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Well, Mary Beth thanked all the appropriate people. I just want to reiterate that Dan Z's role in this was crucial, because as my seatmate, we had several discussions about whether he could support the project, and the creation of the LCSC was critical. And although I was not on it, I did attend most of its meetings, and again, we were very fortunate to have expertise and volunteer effort. And what Lionel said about the local angle is, and I'd like to second that motion too, that's the benefit of having somebody who is a literal product of the city schools and lives in and near the community, doing our work for us. And we'd benefit if we were able to have more of our city employees living in or close to the city and being as much on duty as he was throughout the project.
All right. Thank you, Phil. And unless there are any other comments, why don't you come forward? We'll take a celebratory photo. And our library board folks, if they'd like to join as well, come on down.
And I was remiss in not mentioning the role that the library board played in this, especially Chet DeLong and Brad Jernand, former members.
There.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You guys scooch a little to the left. Sure. Finding the window. All right.
All right. Let's keep moving. So now we're on Mr. Shields, the CIP Council Work Plan update. That's you?
It is. Thank you, Council. So we give a quarterly update on the progress on the CIP many years ago, and that has always continued on through the library board and through all the many volunteers and people who work with staff to make the library such a welcoming place that it is. So in the council work plan, Cindy and I will do this together, and I'll hit some of the highlights of work that is underway and really try to make it kind of forward-looking. And really the report is for the community on what we can expect to see over the coming 12 months, the second half of the adopted City Council two-year work plan. The two-year work plan actually goes through the end of FY24, so we've got about 18 months left in this two-year work plan period. So I'll start with some of the highlights of things that people can expect to see in the area of economic sustainability, then talk about inclusion and affordable housing, talk about safe streets, environmental sustainability, and core governmental services, and just hit some of the highlights. So of course, in economic sustainability, we do have a lot of construction activity that is underway. We'll see the Washington and Broad project rise up out of the ground. Founders Row 2 will break ground, and the West Falls project will take shape with a hotel, office, condo, and apartments. This has been the most commercial square footage that our Building Safety Division has ever processed at one time, and I want to thank the team led by John Russell and all of our very professional staff who are making sure that all of that development is occurring safely, and all of our planners making sure that the projects are being built according to the VCs and according to the approved site plans. We'll complete a sanitary sewer expansion project and a purchase agreement with Fairfax County to make sure that we have the sewer infrastructure to serve this new development as we've been planning for years. Also in the area of economic sustainability, the City Council will consider changes to the city's transitional zone districts that is currently being considered by the Planning Commission, but the intent is to foster reinvestment in these districts in the city. We'll continue to support outdoor dining in the city, which expanded dramatically during the pandemic and contributes so much to the vibrancy of the city, and we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. In the area of inclusion and affordable housing, we'll implement the new Affordable Home Ownership Program in partnership with NHP. We'll execute the MOU with Wesley Housing for preserving the Virginia Village quads, acquiring additional quads, and planning for future redevelopment of that area to provide additional housing options for working people in Falls Church. We'll expand the term of the teacher workforce units at the Reed Building for an additional 10 years, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We'll continue to implement recommendations of the Use of Force Review Committee recommendations for the police department and the city's city government's diversity assessment that occurred last year. In the area of safe streets, Mustang Alley will be completed with a new bike and walking trail for access to Meridian High School. We'll implement the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits on our smaller residential streets. We'll install speed enforcement cameras in the 800 block of West Broad Street. We'll respond more quickly to resident-generated pedestrian and bike safety issues by standing up a staff team within Department of Public Works to be able to go out and make changes to the street to improve safety. We'll construct new sidewalks, filling in missing links, and construct new bus shelters along our most heavily used bus stops. And we'll adopt a new citywide bike master plan incorporating recommendations from a recent Virginia Tech student study completed last November. In the area of environmental sustainability, we'll kick off our government energy plan and our community energy planning efforts. We'll do that in partnership with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to accelerate our adopted goal of reducing carbon emissions by 50% by the year 2030. We're already at 20% reduction, and so we've got some really hard work and hard decisions to make going forward to do that crucial next steps. We'll complete a conversion to LED streetlights citywide. We'll complete the Trammell Branch and the Wren Branch stormwater projects to provide greater resilience and flood protection by those who live near those streams, and we'll carry projects on Sharrow and Hillwood through Vinyl Design. And we'll carry the Greening of Lincoln project through design with resident participation along Lincoln Avenue. In the area of core government services, we're going to kick off a study that was approved in the budget for the future of the Robert Goff Operations Yard, what our space needs are for Public Works operations, a conceptual plan for a new layout of the property yard, and the potential for public-private partnership there to help pay for such improvements. We'll celebrate the 75th anniversary of the city as an independent city in August of this year, and we'll also note that in 2025, following fast on the heels, we'll celebrate the 150th anniversary of being an incorporated town in 1875. We'll conduct a community survey We'll complete the Next Gen 911 project to allow residents to contact 911 through multiple communication platforms. And we'll complete the community center's heating and cooling renewal project. So those are some of the highlights that we're looking forward to, working with the community and with the City Council to carry on the progress of the city and accelerate in some really key areas as well. Cindy's now going to give an update on some of the key projects that the council has approved through the CIP and give you that update, and then be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shield. Starting on page 3, Mr. Shields talked about our sidewalks improvements, which of course we'll have a work session tonight, but I did want to highlight that the Tinner Hill Historic Site sidewalk and the one on South Maple is literally in construction now, and it's very exciting to be completing those missing links. Continuing on the transportation capital side of things on page 4, the Bus Rapid Transit, you all have recently had a briefing, and I wanted to highlight, while that's a long-term project, a very positive milestone happened with this most recent federal budget, and NBTC was awarded an additional $2 million to move forward the actual engineering of that project. So we're pleased to see that progress and how it'll tie into our economic development here. Smart City Grant, we are finalizing the 3-way partnership agreement between Virginia Tech, VDOT, and the city, and I hope end of this month, early next month, to have that before council so that we can actually get back to implementing that program and upgrading our traffic signals starting in the spring. Park Avenue, Great Street, we had some great community engagement. Those comments have been given to the consultant, and they're in the 60% design, so we do think by the end of this year we'll be able to finish that design and be really teed up for the right-of-way. So that's some positive stuff on that front. Broad Street Hawk signals is definitely in the near term happening. At the end of this month, we should have the pre-construction meeting with VDOT and the contractor, and so at that point we'll have a more refined schedule, but it is actually becoming one that we'll see instead of just be working on and getting the funding teed up. And Oak Street Bridge is also in that arena where the notice to proceed has begun and has been issued to the contractor, and we should see construction starting early spring. And on North Washington and Columbia, which is a really important intersection to improve safety and walkability on North Washington, that pre-construction meeting should happen the end of this month as well. Then we'll have a more refined timeline, and also we'll actually be seeing work happening. Mr. Shield mentioned some of the stormwater projects and the greening of Lincoln. I did want to note that through the last federal community requests, actually 2 years ago, not the last one, the previous one, Congressman Byer got $400,000 for that project to supplement the ARPA and the city's funds, and we've been able to work with EPA now to start submitting the grant process. We now have the process in which to do that. And Mr. Shields covered the stormwater for us, which is really exciting to see a lot of good progress there, and we're very excited. I think Lionel's left, but he's a project manager on the LED lights, and we're really excited to actually have the work order in to Dominion. And he told me today that the supply chain that we had reported on 6 to 8 months looks like it's down to 2 to 3, so maybe we'll actually start seeing that project in the near term as well. So a lot of good active stuff that we completed last year is noted in the year in a review. We're working on for this year, and come March you'll be seeing the next 6 years for CIP, so more to come. Thank you, Mr. Shields and Council.
All right, well, thank you. It's certainly a busy time, a lot of good stuff happening, so we're all excited about seeing some shovels in the ground and some real progress. Questions folks have for Mr. Shields?
If I could just give a plug for the annual, the year in review report that is on the city's webpage, and I want to thank the Falls Church News Press also for publicizing that and helping guide people to that document, and also appreciate the plug in the editorial as well. There's a lot of good progress to report, and we do it all hand in hand with residents and the community. So it's a shared satisfaction of work well done.
Ms. Leon?
Mr. Shields, I just have a question on page 9. I think it might be a typo. On the RFP for the city website, your website rollout, when is that? Is it really fall of 23, or you mean fall of 24?
We're looking for...
Or, because the RFP is going out in winter of 23.
So we are looking for the RFP to go out this winter. We would then do work over the summer and have rollout next fall of 23. That is the current schedule.
So winter is now, not next winter. Winter is this winter. This quarter is winter.
This winter.
Yeah, so winter, it can be straddling 2 years, so that's what's intended.
Okay, so
there.
really it's happening in the year of 2020, like in, fall of 23. All right, thanks.
Mr. Duncan?
Lots of great stuff. Wyatt, can you catch me up on the traffic signal at North Washington, across from the fire hall and the office building and the residential street there? The one that we somehow share with Arlington.
So we do share that. This is at Gresham Place, and so we have resolved that we do want to take that signal into the city's system, and we're working through the details of doing that. We have heard more recently that there's been some change to the way that the Arlington County is operating that signal that has been met with, I think, some approval by the residents on Gresham. And we're monitoring that. I don't know exactly what's behind that, but the bottom line is we would like to bring that system into the city's control and have it operate safely for all users of Washington Street and Gresham.
Okay, I support that and hope we can do it with all deliberate speed. The Betos impasse stands where? The streetscape around there? I think I saw a note about that somewhere in the last week or so.
So we will have the report on missing links, and that will be the top priority that's listed in the in terms of having new sidewalks and streetscape installed at that location.
Okay, we'll save that for later. Okay, thanks.
All right, unless Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I was trying to let other people go first and not take too much time because everyone knows this is my favorite topic. So thank you, Cindy and Wyatt, on this. I love the new update where we kind of merge CIP and work plan, especially if this is less work for you guys. I think this is effective. I think I say this every 2 years, but this certainly is one of the most ambitious work plans I've seen. And so I appreciate all the work that went into this and all the thought and obviously all the execution that hopefully we will see. In managing kind of large portfolios of projects, besides the red, yellow, green, and gray, one thing that might be helpful at the beginning is just showing that out of all the projects, how many are in red, how many are in green, just as a quick snapshot to know kind of, across all the projects we've got going on and be able to monitor that month by month and then make sure that we have all the right resources to tackle and how council can help you tackle the yellow and red ones to remove barriers. So that's just my former PM experience coming in. I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm glad to see that public art made it in there. I know that several of us have advocated to actually get some public art on the ground. As a heads up, I guess, for Mr. Lubkeman, I think one thing that needs to come through and get in front of council is actually the public art policy and the process. And there's some debate around what exactly is public art and what is in the city's purview. I think the previous city attorney had weighed in on it, and I think there's some differing opinions on Arts and Maintenance Council. So this is something where I think the First Amendment comes into play, and what really is, just because it's visible in the public doesn't mean that the city has a right to kind of say it can't go there. So just have FYI is something that I think is an important thing to address, and hopefully does not a barrier to implementing a lot of the public art we want to see around town. The second thing I wanted to talk about was around parklets. So I know that the EDA has done a lot of work around thinking about the next opportunities and how to deploy the ARPA dollars, especially in the economic areas that could use reinvestment. So I know we've targeted 3 parks
the South Washington, South Annandale, kind of an alley in South Washington, and then one, I think, at the corner of South Maple and South Washington. Where are we with kind of getting resources aligned to start mobilizing against that? Because I know we have limited time to use all those ARPA dollars.
So our goal is to be able to have one of them underway this spring, and so we're working on that schedule, and I think that will be possible.
Okay. Maybe the easier one would be one that has less like moving ground, like the alley one seems like it's mainly furnishings and art and lightings. Hopefully that can be one that can be done sooner than later, because I think we'd love to see this, after the success of Mr. Brown's Park, we'd love to see more of those done. So I'm very supportive of that. I'll talk save sidewalks for later since we have a whole work session. I know that we've talked about funding, and we funded the rapid response team. When should we expect to see the first projects being done? I know we're still at the phase where we probably need to hire people, but when can council expect to see projects being implemented by this rapid team?
I think this summer.
And do we know kind of rough throughput, like how many projects could they expect to handle?
So let me work that through in a little bit more detail. I know I don't want to sort of speak off the cuff. I know that Herb and Zach have kind of worked that out. So let me get that report back to council.
Okay. That'll be just really exciting, because I think we've talked about wanting to fund and see more rapid improvements, and I think that'll be really responsive to what we're hearing from the community. So that'll be great. Speaking of being responsive to the community, on Park Avenue, sounds like we are in 60% design now. Before, I guess, the ship completely sails, I don't feel like I ever got a really great final answer on how we were going to accommodate bikes, given the bike advocates we heard from. I think we kind of settled on we're not going to have a dedicated bike lane, so if that's the case and we're going to do this bike boulevard concept, there's been some data shared with us that said that in order to be really successful at being a bike boulevard, you need to throttle both the volumes and the speeds. And I think there's some simple design changes we can make sure are incorporated to make sure that that happens. Do we know, Cindy, whether that 60% design incorporates those things?
My last conversation with Mr. Bradley indicated yes, the majority of, for example, your list and links were incorporated or being incorporated, and I think the only one that might be an engineering and policy regulation compliance is the double yellow line.
Let's circle back, because I feel like I'm certain we're going to hear from the bike folks about where we are with that project. And so if we are incorporating a lot of those design elements where we think we can get bikes and cars and peds all mingling safely, that's a great answer. And I think we want to be able to circle back with them and tell them that we did hear you and here's what we're doing about it, and close the loop on that. Mr. Shields covered the projects on Broad briefly, but when exactly are we actually going to see construction underway for the Hawks on Broad, the multimodal projects, the Berman crossings? I feel like those three in particular we've talked about for a while, and I know they're held up for various good reasons, but when should the public expect to see those actually getting implemented? Are we at a point where we might have timelines?
So the Hawk signal in particular, we're going to have very firm timelines in a month.
Yes.
We're going to see that under construction, I think, soon, this summer.
And the same would be for North Washington and Columbia, because we have the pre-con meeting at the end of January.
Okay.
WNOD, I'd have to circle back to answer that one.
Okay. That's great. On affordable housing, likewise, I think it's probably been 6 months now since we signed the final contracts for both, or we authorized you to sign the contracts with both Wesley as well as NHP. I think it would be great to get an update, and we don't have to do it tonight, on where we are with those, because I feel like, especially on the home ownership front, while there are a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines because of high interest rates, I want to make sure we're not missing the market on the opportunity to go out and buy units for that program. So I don't know whether Cindy or Wyatt, whether we should do that tonight or whether we could save it for some other time.
You did recently mention that to me, and I didn't have a chance to really work with Dana and Mr. Woodley on that other than to mention it. So maybe we could do a future meeting or a follow-up memo so we can make it comprehensive for you.
Great. Or we can do it in the Housing Commission first,
And I think
too.
over the next 2 weeks, we'll be making some good milestone progresses that we can report out.
Yes, and definitely there's a lot of good work happening. We just want to make sure that since we've said this is important for us to do, and we signed these contracts a long time ago now, that we're actually out there, looking at units. My last one is on the community survey, and this is something I think we were all very excited to do, to kind of gauge the community on what the quality of life is here, how they get their sources of information. When can the public expect that to go out to them?
Want me to take that? I'm working with an internal steering committee, and we've reviewed 4 firms. And so we're meeting later this week to compare those internally, so then we could look at budget and a recommendation to Wyatt. I think we are scheduled February 6th for us to do a report to council to give you an update on sort of the scope, the type of questions, and make sure we're aligned with your intentions. And then the goal would be to get that out late spring and wrap it up by the end of summer.
Great, sounds good. Thank you very much for all the work.
All right, Ms. Connolly.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. First, I want to say thank you to Maggie and the Communications Department for the annual report. It was great to see all those things, and I'm sure you had a hand in that, and it looks good, and it has a lot of really good information about the city, and that is something that we have been asking for a while, so thank you for getting that done. Reiterating Ms. Hardy's questions about public art, we did put $20,000, I think, into the budget amendment to start to work on the utility box covers, and I'm just hoping that that can get underway soon. I don't know what the plan is on that one. I know there might be a new person coming to Rec and Parks, so I'm hoping that happens. I'm looking.
So, yeah, we will identify, I think we will identify good boxes that are very visible, and I think we've got a good list of those, and look forward to working with Catch or Falls Church Arts on what the actual content of the art will be and move forward.
Right, I think we put money in there so that there could be a contractor to work on that project specifically.
Right, but I believe that's going to be Catch or Falls Church Arts led.
I don't know. That's my question. I don't know that it is Falls Church Arts. I'm not sure.
I don't think there's a staff lead who's like trying to figure out what kind of artwork or who the vendors will be. I think that would be working with those two groups.
Yeah,
We'll follow up after this to confirm that.
Yeah, I'll put it on the list for follow-up so we can work on the process and the coordination and the
That's the way
legal
it's worked
piece
in the past.
for who approves and who recommends.
Exactly, right.
Some of your outline points from before the holidays.
Okay, I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost with the holidays coming through. Okay.
We got them.
There's a little bit on here of replacing sidewalks or missing sidewalk areas, and I just want to note that there are opportunities sometimes when a developer does a project to enhance the sidewalk, either through voluntary concessions or because of developer proffers or ideas. So there may be some of those coming up, and I would like to encourage us to do that in areas where there is a developer who's willing to work with the city to widen the sidewalk, the existing sidewalk. I think that would be really helpful to us to be able to do that in those missing sidewalk links, especially along Broad Street. These other two things actually are not related to the CIP, but I want to make sure I get them in there, and that is related to the earlier question about Pearson Square. I think it would be super helpful if there was a process laid out, because as we look at the Byron with their request for VCs, they have an attorney, and the attorney's been working on this for many months to try to change theirs. And now with Pearson Square, we have the tenant who's coming in and asking for a change to the VCs, and that seems like a very different process. So if we may indeed have more of these, we really do need to outline and define a specific process to make it as easy as possible for the applicants and for the city council to understand what the requests are. So I just want to put that in there with the earlier request that Ms. Hardy and I made related to altering VCs. And then my last request is related to the library report, and that is we just talked about a lot of lessons learned. I would appreciate if Mr. Millar could add them to that report so that they're on paper, so that next time this happens, and it may be 10 years from now, we have something to look back on instead of having to look at the minutes of the meeting and say, what was that one thing, when those old people were on city council a long time ago. So thank you for those. Oh, and one more. And how's the process on the Greenway Downs neighborhood traffic calming going?
It is progressing a little slower because of the holidays. The first thing that delayed us needing to do some more engineering survey work on the stormwater. So we canceled the December community meeting, and this week I'll have an update since the holidays with Mr. Bradley and Mr. Sykes on where the consultant is, and then the plan was to reschedule in January, early February, the community meeting.
And then last, you mentioned Mr. Bradley, and I'm looking forward to seeing the new sidewalks on Tinner Hill, because that was another missing sidewalk link. And I know those have been going in over the last few weeks.
Yep, they are poured, and they have covers over them, kind of protecting them as they are curing.
Very good.
That and South Maple.
All right, Mr. Duncan, quickly.
On the Mary Beth's mention of working with developers who want to do sidewalk improvements, yes, I second that motion. The communication we saw about the Smoothie King operation, I take on board Wyatt's comments about there being procurement issues and, I don't know, federal money involved and whatever, but that would be a great opportunity if we've got a willing developer to contribute to the cost of improving that. If the city could do a share, I think that would be good, and it would speed things up there.
All right. Unless there's anything else, why don't we go ahead and keep moving, get on to the business on the agenda. We haven't started our agenda, or at least the business on our agenda just yet. So keep in mind we do have a work session as well after our regular session. So Madam Clerk, please call the first item business on the agenda, please.
Yes, we have TR 23-01, resolution adopting a revised policy for remote participation in meetings by City Council.
All right, are you doing a staff report on this? Mr. Walker? Okay.
I'll be happy to, Mr. Mayor, and I'll keep it very brief. This is a housekeeping item, primarily designed to implement changes to the Code of Virginia that went into effect on September the 1st. From a practical standpoint, there's no real difference to your existing policy. The only real thing of note to be aware of is, and this is a little bit of lessons learned from the pandemic, is the General Assembly has split out the process during a state of emergency versus a non-state of emergency. So this policy deals with regular course of business, and other than that, there aren't really any changes of note. You still have the ability to participate remotely for personal reasons, up to a maximum of, as noted in there, of 25% of the meetings, the actual meetings. So it's a little bit of a moving target during the year. And for medical reasons, it's an unlimited number of ability to participate remotely. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions? All right, do we have a motion?
Mayor, I move to adopt TR 23-01.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Any public comment? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Will you call the next item?
Yes, we have TR 23-02, resolution to approve the Teacher Workforce Unit Agreement with Jefferson 402 LLC, authorize the city manager to execute the agreement on behalf of the city, and authorize a one-time payment in the sum of $350,000.
All right. We've got a fresh-faced new staff person. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening.
And maybe I'll just make a quick introduction. We're joined by Brendan Woodley, who has joined the city in September. He's our housing development specialist for the city. He's been doing wonderful work and making sure that we execute our agreements with NHP and with Wesley, or execute our MOU with Wesley. And that's been taking up the majority of his time executing the 2 Amazon Reach grants that the city's been awarded. And so what is before council tonight is a component of the first Amazon Reach grant award, and this use of extending the term of teacher workforce units at the Reed Building was the stated purpose, the sort of the secondary stated purpose of that first grant application that the city made. And what's before council is agreement to execute that. So let me turn it over to Mr. Woodley. Mr. Woodley joins us from the District of Columbia, where he worked in their planning department, and so he's been a great contributor here with the City of Falls Church, and we're very pleased to have him. Thank you, Mr. Woodley.
Thank you so much, Wyatt. I appreciate it. Nice to meet some of you. Nice to see some of you again. Good evening. As Wyatt said, I'm working with HHS as the new Housing Development Specialist. And in that capacity, I've been working, for example, on their Amazon Reach grant program. So the purpose of my testimony here tonight is to give you remarks on the resolution to approve the Teacher Workforce Unit Agreement with Jefferson 402 LLC, authorize the city manager to execute the agreement on behalf of the city, and authorize a one-time payment in the sum of $350,000. For all intents and purposes, I'll try to be brief. The most important thing to keep in mind with this resolution is that it's mostly a technical resolution in nature, as both the use of the funds and their purpose, in this case to extend an affordability covenant for 9 units for an additional 10 years, have already been approved by the council in past sessions. So the purpose here is to formally approve that agreement and the actual payment. That's all we're doing for this resolution. So in consideration of this information, I would just like to point out a few items worth noting here. First of all, this is for the Reed Building. The Reed Building is a mixed-use commercial building. There are 26 rental units in this property, 9 of which are currently set aside as affordable housing units. These are the units we are planning on executing a covenant to extend for an additional 10 years. Previously, they have had a covenant in place for 20 years, so this is just an extension of that 20-year covenant for an additional 10 years. Of the 26 units, again, these are 9 units affordable housing in this property. They represent over 1/3 of the total rental units in this property. And of course, this is among the highest percentage of ADUs in a property in the city, particularly with affordability at 60% of AMI. In addition to providing some of the highest concentration of ADUs in a property in the city, this resolution will preserve housing for teachers. Additionally, the proposed total dollar amount is incredibly cost-effective, as the amount per unit is over the 10 years is $3,889 per year, which equates to about $324 per month in rents that we are subsidizing to get the incredible 60% AMI and or teacher workforce housing in this case, which is a fantastic use of funds. In fact, the way we're using these funds in this particular manner has been commended and recognized by other housing groups and localities for its creative use, specifically for the Amazon Reach grant funds. And last thing here, the Amazon Reach funds themselves have already been released. They've been dispersed by VA Housing. We've received them as of last month. And they're basically sitting in an account ready to be deployed. So we're ready, willing, and able, and we just need to make sure we cross the I's, dot the T's in this case.
All right, thank you very much. We have a comment or two or question. Ms. Leon?
Yes. Thank you very much for coming forth with this. I'm looking at page 2 of 8 of the amended deed on the easement and declaration of restricted covenants. There's language in here that says for the initial rental. So I just want to be clear, is that rent fixed?
The rent is not fixed. It's based on a sliding scale that we produce once per year. We've had our rents for 2023 already approved, but I would also like to note that there's kind of a moving scale with the way the ADU agreement is set up, whereas initially we look for teachers at 60%, then we look for teachers at 80%, then we look for general population at 60%, then at 80%, depending on who is ready, willing, and able to procure a unit at that time.
Can you walk me through the guidelines that you are using for what determines that increase on year-on-year rent for that individual in that teacher workforce unit?
I could probably get back to you on that. I think there's probably a lengthy process that we could either provide in a memo or a subsequent follow-up council meeting. Would that work?
Okay. But it's clear that the message here is you do raise the rents year on year, and and there's a rationale.
There's
but
a
we're gonna
rationale.
talk through it.
Typically, we index the rents based on.
There you go.
Based on the income available. So I think actually recently they've gone down, but I don't want to be held to that, as I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's based on the actual affordability limits that are currently in place in the city at the time.
If there's a policy around that, I'd love, I think all of us would like to understand that. If it's a policy versus a methodology, I think we benefit from the formality of having that as a policy that we consistently can apply year on year. So this is targeted for, let me back up. As part of the Virginia Housing Agreement, there was mention of intention to provide administrative improvements to the current process. Can you summarize in more specificity what those improvements are that are reflected in this amended restrictive deed that's different from the prior one?
Maybe I could reach out to either Brian or Cindy.
Let me do the first part, and then Brian was very helpful. So this was one of the earliest covenants that the city did, and there were a lot of lessons learned in terms of the annual certification. So I do know there's a formal process that Kayleen Marks goes through with this property as well as all of them. And the problem was it wasn't consistent and aligned with a lot of the other covenant, so that was an improvement for consistency. Also to make sure that what happened when a unit became vacant, so it didn't sit vacant, so we had good coordination and process between the property owner and the city. And so those were some of the changes. It was not a dramatic change by any means in terms of the core content. The extension of the 10 years was significant. And Brian, to add?
Right. I think the idea was sort of a quick and dirty extension, for lack of a better term. I mean, the process was working well. The units are rented. There isn't an issue, to our knowledge, with the units sitting vacant. So it was sort of a system that's working well, just update some of the language, and more importantly, extend the term of the covenant for what is essentially a bargain price.
Right.
Okay. I am totally supportive of this. I think my one area of follow-up, and maybe this is the Housing Commission discussion, is understanding, again, what is that scalar policy and how that rent is reissued every year, and just being aware of that and making sure that it's supporting the intent of what this is, which is giving our teachers affordable housing. So thank you for this. No questions for me.
Mr. Duncan?
Maybe this was just answered. What are the conditions on the ground now in the 9 units? Do we have them all rented to teachers or school staff at least? And that's another question. Is it just teachers, or can it be school staff?
It can be school staff, it can be city employees, and again, there are different tranches in terms of how we try to find people to occupy those units. I will say that this particular building has a hard time staying vacant in any way. It's very well received in the community, and the units are very affordable, so people are always trying to find units at this particular property. So as of right now, I don't think there's any vacancies, but I can get back to you on that.
That's good. Is the, I would just be curious to know, is the city staff AMI 60 or 80% as you referred to for the general public?
For this property, I believe it goes as low as 60%.
For city staff too?
Oh, for city staff? Yes, I believe it expands to the entire population for 60% if we can't find somebody, a teacher at 60 or 80%.
Okay, so teachers, school staff get first preference on all 9 units. Is that what I'm hearing?
First preference at 60%, then 80%, yes.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, can't be a bad thing. This building, though, did go up at a time when I think we were highly attuned to compensation for teachers and trying to do everything in the world we could to get teachers, better situated income-wise and living-wise. And I would just say that as time has gone on, I think we've developed a broader awareness that, city staff also, as we said earlier there with Lionel, benefit from living in or near the city. And I would just, I don't know what could be changed or altered, but I would just encourage us to always consider city staff too, as well as school staff in our affordable housing efforts, maybe in the future units that are going to come online, particularly at Founders Row 2, where we have a richer mix of affordable units than in some of the buildings that we've done, and not as rich as 33%, which is a great number for the Reed building. But it'd be good to just remember the city staff in our future ADU efforts.
Appreciate that, Mr. Duncan. If I could just note, this is the only property that the teacher workforce have the initial priority, and that was at the request of the developer at the time the building was coming forward. I will note that there are teachers in there and support staff, and it does turn over. Part of that is because which is a good thing. At some point, these teachers become over income because of the compensation, and so then oftentimes they're in a different unit in that building, and then one becomes available for a ADU.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. No questions on the specifics of this. I think I'm very supportive of it. I think, as someone previously said, this is at a bargain price. I think we're spending $4,000 per unit per year, and so it certainly makes sense to extend the affordability, especially since we're using Amazon dollars. But I want to take the opportunity to highlight that we actually have more buildings with expirations coming up. So Pearson, for example, is going to have 15 units expiring in 2027, not to mention the Fields, which is the big one, and 96 units expiring around 2027, 2028 as well. And that will be a harder one to crack. But I do want to make sure that even though we've got our hands full with NHP and Wesley, that we don't lose sight of all the buildings that we've built and the expirations, because only starting with Founders Row 1 do we have affordable units that never expire. And so we've inherited a great portfolio of affordable housing units, but they're all going to expire off the books, and we are still losing them faster than we can build them. And so where we have opportunities to pursue additional grant dollars, I think we should absolutely consider kind of a similar model to deploy in those buildings so we don't lose them and extend the affordability where possible.
Agreed.
Thank you.
And if I may, just a quick note to that, I do want to say that Senator Saslaw is submitting on behalf of the city a budget amendment for $3 million to help on affordable housing. Potentially wrote it broad so that the city can decide whether that's Virginia Village or a model like this to replicate. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions or comments. This is a great price, right? Very efficient use of funds. And I guess my question is, this number, this price, how did this come to? In other words, where did the dollar amount come from?
From what I understand, this number was agreed to by the former director of HHS and the developer, and basically they looked at what a cost basis would be for the 10 years for each unit, how much the developer would be less in rent, and subsidizing that, I'm assuming, over some sort of time value over money.
Because it seems like it's much more efficient use of funds than, frankly, new construction. And I don't know whether that's because it's just an existing building has depreciated or whatever it is, and so it's a much better value. But I think the city ought to be looking at this model on a number of older units throughout the city, because it's a great way to provide affordable housing that appears to be substantially cheaper than new build. And I don't know, do you recall the number we paid at, for example, the Whole Foods site per unit? My recollection was it was in the threes, but maybe that's wrong. Our contribution per unit.
I don't recall exactly what that figure was.
I guess what I'd like to see is some kind of report or analysis that does it not just on a unit basis, because units vary in terms of square footage, but on an actual square footage basis. Like, in other words, what a unit on a per square foot basis cost us at Whole Foods versus what it's costing us here on a per year basis. And then also if you want to net present value it and discount it back and forth. But the bottom line is this appears to be a substantially cheaper way to provide affordable housing in the city than new build construction. And if that's the case, it seems like we ought to do some analysis and approach some other property owners to see if we can replicate this. And it may be more efficient use of funds even if, we could take them on to units in a new building, or in lieu of that, get cash and use cash, deploy cash more efficiently to get more units in an existing building. That may be something to consider as well. But anyway, I think this is a very interesting model or example that we should look to replicate because it appears to be extremely efficient use of affordable housing dollars. And so I would just ask if you all could provide some kind of analysis on what these units have cost us or what they're presumed to have cost us. As Whole Foods, we bought units, right, to pop that up from 6 to 10%. And I don't remember how many units we did purchase or effectively purchased through the proceeds of the parking lot sale.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and I think the instincts are that it is a much greater value at a financially stabilized building than it is for a project that hasn't had financing yet. And so let's follow up on that and run those numbers.
It could be a boon to people who have older buildings as well. In other words, a cash infusion could be helpful to them either for improvements or just for cash flow or whatever. And so I again would ask that maybe we look at an analysis of this particular proposal and existing projects and how we might replicate this and how much more efficient this might be than other ways to provide affordable housing. Ms. Leon?
And this, it says teachers, but this is targeted for school staff.
Correct.
Okay. Do we want to say that to be more accurate?
The school staff and the general staff pick up in the secondary and tertiary priorities, teachers being first. That was the intent originally.
Okay.
Okay, unless there's any other questions, why don't we go to a motion? Someone else had their hand up. I see a hand floating in space. I don't know if it's not Phil, but if someone else does, you're certainly free to speak. If we have any other speakers on the line who'd like to make a comment. If not,
Good evening, all. It's Dana Jones, and I just wanted to clarify Councilwoman Leon's question about the rent just quickly. And that's just, we use the same process that we used for all of our ADU rents. It's calculated every year based on HUD AMI. So we will either go up or down depending on what the area median income is for the area. And we look at all residents not paying more than 30% of their total income towards rent. So that's how the calculation is done. And then the Housing Commission approves it each year, and we use that for all our ADU units, and we provide that to REID for their rent, usually in November or December, so that they can start using it in the beginning of the year in January. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Unless we have any further comment, do we have a motion anyone would like to make?
Motion to adopt TR 23-02.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Any public comment? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to the consent agenda and then take a short break and then move on to our work session. But on the consent agenda, does anyone have any items they'd like to remove or any matter they'd like to remove from the consent agenda? If not, do we have a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk?
I missed the motion. Who made the motion?
I
Ms.
did.
Hiscott?
Oh, thank you.
I know I'm short.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
Thank you. Unless there's objection, let's take a 5-minute recess, reconvene at 9:40, and then move on to our work session agenda. We're in recess. right, it's 8:41. Let's get back in session from recess and move on to our work session. Mr. Shields, do you want to introduce this item? Or is there someone else who's going to be speaking to it?
So at work session, we're going to have a presentation from Laura Arsenault, is a principal planner with the city and a new member of the city staff. She joined just about the same time as Brendan Woodley. And Laura comes to us from Fairfax County, where she was the branch chief for historic preservation with Fairfax County. And it's great working with Laura, and really glad that she's a member of our team. We're here tonight to talk about outdoor dining, and there are two zoning code amendments that we're proposing that would facilitate outdoor dining in the city, but also allow us to make sure that the ADA and fire safety and other things like that are part of our regulatory overview and have a permitting process to facilitate that as well. So, Laura, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation. We're looking tonight really just for council feedback on this approach. We do have a deadline, however, of late February is when the 6-month extension of using the COVID emergency relaxation of zoning rules would expire. And so that's a deadline to keep in mind. And we have a proposal on how to address these issues. Laura, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, City Council. My name is Laura Arsenault, and I'm a principal planner with the Department of Community Planning and Development Services. Tonight, I'm here to present a work session item regarding two zoning ordinance amendments. The first is a zoning ordinance amendment for outdoor dining, and the second is an amendment regarding reduction of minimum parking requirements in specific circumstances. Next slide. Thank you. So first, a brief outline of the presentation. I'll go over the purpose and need of the zoning ordinance amendments, what is currently working in the city for these two uses, and what needs attention. I'll go over local, state, and federal code requirements pertinent to these two uses, an overview of both zoning ordinance amendments. And then finally, a next steps, a timeline, and a summary. Purpose and need. For the purpose and need of the zoning ordinance amendments, staff has noted that outdoor dining is positively received by the community. Outdoor dining creates a vibrant community and pedestrian experience, but as Mr. Shields mentioned, the temporary outdoor dining zoning provisions are set to expire on February 27, 2023. Further, moving forward, and as a result, we must provide businesses and owners a certainty of rules and regulations for outdoor dining use. For the parking zoning ordinance amendment, uses in older buildings are restricted by parking minimum requirements, and some of these examples are in correlation with the outdoor dining use. Next slide, please. What's working? As mentioned previously, outdoor dining creates a community vibrancy and pedestrian experience while offering streetscape improvements, option for diners, and flexibility in seating areas for owners, as you will see in these two pictures. Next slide. What needs attention? There needs to be a clear understanding of local, state, and federal codes that regulate basic safety, health, and welfare requirements for outdoor dining uses. Staff is creating a process for the implementation of the new outdoor dining use permit with the form and submission requirements. And partly as a result of the success of outdoor dining, staff is also examining the modification to the parking minimums for certain properties. Next slide, please. So starting with federal and state code requirements. Federal and state building code are determined by the state but enforced by local jurisdictions, including codes such as occupancy level, number of toilet fixtures, egress, alcohol regulations, ADA, and fire code. In contrast, local building codes are determined by City Council and enforced by local jurisdictions. Examples include zoning, outdoor dining, parking, and noise. Next slide, please. Firstly, staff is proposing a zoning ordinance amendment to create a new outdoor dining use as an accessory use to indoor restaurants. Existing businesses with outdoor dining on file must conform with their current certificate of occupancy for number of diners and their existing outdoor dining layout. There are about 13 of these applications, and they were submitted from May 2020 to present. These applications were reviewed by zoning staff and by building safety staff. Any new businesses that would like to file a new outdoor dining use must submit a one-time application form and supplementary items needed for administrative review. All applications, existing and new, will have no fee, no required engineer plan. They must meet ADA and fire safety, and they must be located on private property. Oh, and will be inspected biannually. Next slide, please. For the second zoning amendment, staff is proposing to remove parking minimums on commercial properties with buildings less than 20,000 square feet of gross floor area, not just with outdoor dining uses, but for all uses. The map on this slide shows the location of properties that meet this criteria, which is about 200. Staff proposes the zoning amendment to allow flexibility for existing and future uses on these properties. Smaller, often older commercial buildings can have difficulty signing new tenants due to minimum parking requirements. Larger shopping centers and larger redevelopment projects can seek parking reductions and reduce parking minimums. Throughout the temporary COVID zoning regulations, there have been limited complaints of outdoor dining uses in parking spaces. Further, as shown earlier, the current council work plan identifies citywide parking study as one of its priorities to address this issue. And even if these properties meet the zoning requirements, all properties must meet federal and state codes as applicable. Therefore, staff believes the reduction in parking proposal is appropriate for consideration by City Council. Next slide, please. Moving forward on the review of these proposed amendments includes engagement with city restaurants for both zoning ordinance amendments. Staff will be creating a one-page informational flyer about the proposed amendment process for distribution. There will be outreach to additional boards and commissions as appropriate. There'll be first and second readings proposed currently for February. An important date to remember, once again, is the February 27th, 2023 date in which the temporary local outdoor dining provisions are set to expire. Next slide, please. So in summary, staff recommends these proposed zoning ordinance amendment as outdoor dining has created options for restaurant patrons, provided additional dining space for businesses, and created a vibrant pedestrian-oriented community. Clarification of federal, state, and proposed local codes will enhance the safety of patrons and provide predictability for owners while providing flexible zoning and parking. The administrative outdoor dining review will expedite the process for businesses, and in the modification of minimum parking requirements will allow some flexibility for uses. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. Welcome to Falls Church. You're off to a great start. Let's go ahead and see if anyone has any questions or comments. Ms. Connolly?
Thank you for that very thorough report. This is exactly what I was hoping to see, just to look at all of it. A question, would this apply to only businesses that are using outdoor dining now, or all businesses, one that may come in later that wants to give it a shot?
So there's currently about 13 businesses we have on file that have approved permits for outdoor dining. And what we're asking is for those to come back in and make sure they're in conformance with their certificate of occupancy and their outdoor dining layout that they have on file with us. And we can work through them on that. Any that aren't included in those 13 will be considered new applications, and they will go through the formal process.
And the process is streamlined?
Sure, yes. The process is an administrative review by staff only. It will be reviewed by the zoning administrator and relative building staff and safety staff, the fire marshal as appropriate for certain needs. We're expecting the review time to be about 2 weeks for an initial review, but obviously we would need to do an inspection and other things like that.
Mr. Snyder?
So thanks very much. I'm looking at one of the attachments, which is the application for outdoor seating area. It looks to me like it's very burdensome, and we've just heard no firm commitment about how fast a restaurant can, that has actually done this successfully for a year or more, has to go through a time-consuming process. What happened to the notion of bringing forward the restaurants rapidly, giving them an automatic approval, and lessening the burden? it seems to me we're doing two things. Number one, we're not really solving the issue, which is how to make it on a permanent basis, the restaurants that have innovated and remained in business and competitive during the pandemic period. Meanwhile, we're opening up the ordinance to a whole discussion about parking, when and how required. So on the one hand, we're not solving the issue, and on the other hand, we're creating a whole lot of others. So I'm a little bit confused by the whole approach here. Maybe you could clarify things for me. But I look at this process and it looks burdensome and time-consuming, when the whole idea was the restaurants have already shown they can do this. It allows them to stay in business, so why would we create a process that would make it more difficult for them to do it? Now, if there are state requirements that have to be met, and those are unreasonable, perhaps we should include those in our legislative agenda or our regulatory agenda and present them in Richmond. Thanks.
So one of the issues that, and you hit the nail on the head a little bit, is that one of the state regulations are not being met for some of the outdoor dining. So we wanted to make sure that the health and safety and all those were taken care of. Some of the state requirements, including tents, the length that tents can be up, and also heaters outside, need to be enforced and communicated to the restaurants. I will say that there is no current use in the zoning ordinance for outdoor dining, which is one of the issues we're trying to solve, and why we're bringing this forward tonight.
I just go back to my initial concerns. We're not doing what I think this all started to do, and then we're now creating a community-wide discussion about parking requirements all over the city, so which is obviously very sensitive depending on what side of the issue you're on, should take a lot of community involvement. And I don't see why we just can't address the issue at hand, which is we've got restaurants that have been successful. Why don't we make it easy for them to continue? And if, again, there are state regulatory issues, let's take it up with the state regulators. That would be my preferred approach. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Other comments? Who does? Phil? Okay, Phil.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Laura. Have you, in discussions with the 13 restaurants, gotten any idea of the scope of their intended applications? Are they trying to, hold the number of seats that they've established during the pandemic loosening, or increase the number of seats, or how are they handling, public facilities, bathrooms? Fire compliance, ADA was mentioned. I mean, what is the scope of the future of outdoor dining as some of the folks that you've been talking with see it? And also another question, you mentioned it has to be on private land. Does it have to be on their private land? I mean, we have at least one restaurant I can think of that has got a substantial outdoor facility, which is, I don't believe, on its own property. It's worked some sort of arrangement to have an adjoining property owner share space. And I'm just wondering, are there other situations like that?
There may be. I can't think of any right off of the top of my head. So that language about their contiguous or on the same property as the primary use might be something that we look at. In terms of, so I'll stop there, and if you have other additional questions.
Well, I guess I mean, it's a pretty tight timeline. We're talking, you mentioned the end of February, and there are 13 applications at least, and I'm just trying to prepare everybody for the fact that this is maybe not going to be as easy as some folks thought it might be, because some of the situations around town are working out great, and we don't seem to miss the parking, and that's just fine. Others may be a little more complicated, and I just want to prepare folks for that we're listening, we're hearing, we want to support outdoor dining, but we do have to comply with, public safety and accommodations and fire safety and all that, because we're going to do it. We want to do it right and safely. And I'm just I guess, setting up a flare that says, don't expect this to be quite the simple thing that we might have thought it was.
Understood. We haven't done outreach to each of the 13 existing ones yet, but we did talk extensively with Building Safety and the Economic Development Office and their contacts for kind of running this through in our proposal. So we're here for a work session with you all tonight to hopefully get some guidance on this before we kind of dig in and propose this to those members of the community. So we wanted to get some feedback before we went into that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure you'll get it. I guess my 2 cents worth is let's just try to get it right the first time rather than creating the impression that everything is just going to swim along as it has been for the last almost 3 years. Acknowledge that we've I'd like to say the pandemic's over, but here at my house it's not. But still, we hope to be turning the page to a new day, and we want to make sure that outdoor dining in Falls Church is done over the long term the right way, and I'm sure it will be. I mean, we got staff to make sure that we're backed up, but the restaurant owners need to be aware that, they're going to be meeting with some expectations, I think, from our building safety people that may seem like, oh, we haven't been doing that. Well, yeah, but now we're going to do it. And it may take a little time, may take a little money to make things right.
If I could interject for just a moment, this is Paul Stoddard, Planning Director with the city. So one of the things we've been running to on the staff side is that there are restaurant owners that actually want to make investments in their outdoor spaces and make them permanent. And they're running into sort of two problems that we're trying to address. One is that they don't know what the certainty of the rules are. So they don't know if outdoor dining is going to be allowed going further. So we want to make this as permanent as much as they do so that they understand what the rules are going forward. The other is that some of these restaurant spaces run into occupancy limits. So it's not just how much space do you have, it's how many bathrooms do you have, it's what's the configuration of your doors, how is your hood ventilation set up inside your kitchen. And so they need to know what the rules are so they know what investments they can make and what investments they should make in order to keep their operation going and even expand it. I think one of the things we've seen throughout this is that people like outdoor dining. Certainly the restaurants like it because it's enabled them to survive, but also the patrons like it. It's something they enjoy doing and they want to do more of it. And so that's what this is really trying to push forward, is make permanent these outdoor dining rules so that people can keep doing it. The reason we brought up parking, that's a sort of a linchpin that makes this all work. That really the temporary allowances for outdoor dining were about getting rid of the parking requirements so that people could use that space for other means. And that's what we're trying to do here, is make that permanent so that people don't have to set aside a large portion of their site to parking, that they can use it for other more productive uses.
Thank you for those comments. I think you're taking on board what I'm hearing. I hear what Mr. Snyder's saying, and that's, discussing parking is always guaranteed to make for a long meeting. And we had not really intended, I think, for this to be a really long process, the outdoor dining process. And yet, there are so many properties whose use is limited across the city because of suburban-style 1950s parking requirements that this would be a opportunity to, do something about in a way that would help advance the cause of outdoor dining.
Yeah, that's, it's a related angle. The other thing we're seeing is that there are folks that want to come in and tenant some of these older buildings. Even if they want to put a restaurant indoors, they can't meet the parking requirements. So a potential restaurant owner comes in, talks to zoning, talks to building safety, talks to the landlord. They're ready to set up their business, but we say, wait a second, you can't actually meet the parking requirements in the table. And so the parking requirements are actually turning away economic activity that would otherwise set up shop. And often these are the spaces that are in the smaller buildings. These are the buildings in the 100 block, the 200 block of Broad Street, some of the smaller buildings up and down Hillwood or West Broad. So these are the buildings that I think people look at and they add a sense of charm to the community, but it's a hard thing to actually tenant them because of those parking restrictions. So the reason for bringing forward this restriction or this proposed relaxing of the parking standard, and it's a move that a lot of communities across the country have already taken as a way to spur economic activity and release some of the barriers that these older buildings face, and give those buildings a second life that doesn't require tearing down the building so you can put up more parking spaces. And then lastly, just to the point about existing restaurants, so those would all be able to continue operating as they are today. That's one of the things we've got in our phase-in period is that if you're, and again, it's a $0 permit, and the intent is that someone could actually hand draw this thing with whatever they can find in Google Maps. But the idea is that someone could come in, sketch out what they're planning to do. That's if someone's setting up a new restaurant. If they've already got an existing restaurant and they're doing what they said they did and they're under their occupancy calculations, then they can just keep going without coming back in.
Mr. Snyder, Jim Snyder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to reinforce what Paul was just saying and thank Laura and he for doing such a good job bringing this ahead. In your work plan that you looked at tonight, one of the items in there is looking at parking for older buildings. Many of them were built before these new zoning codes. Independent operators find a way to make it work, unlike a lot of chain places in terms of doing more with less. And so, and nationally at the moment, there's a big look by many cities, large and small, to see whether parking is inhibiting revitalization, economic development, and also affordable housing. So I think it's a very important topic, and I applaud the bringing it up at this point. It is on your work plan. I do think it is an inhibitor. In my own personal experience, when Clarendon was having lots of trouble when Metro was built, the county eliminated parking for restaurants within 1,200 feet of the Metro, and it resulted in a large boom of restaurants being built around the Metro stations, which previously couldn't be occupied. So there's a good history of being able to make these things work. I think it's worthy of further study and positive consideration by the council and others. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. So I think Paul touched on this, but to make sure I'm reading the staff report correctly. So for existing businesses that already have outdoor dining that we relaxed during COVID, first of all, welcome, Laura, and thank you for the very good staff report. Because I think we all share Dave Snyder's concern that we want to make sure that there's a low barrier to entry and we keep this as easy as possible. But I think from my read of the staff report, we are trying to do exactly that. So if you already have existing outdoor dining that we approved during COVID, you're not reapplying. We're going to go check your CO. We're going to make sure that you don't have violations of any kind on the either state, federal, or local violations. And then assuming there's no issues, then you can proceed. So we're not asking people to go through that 2-week process, resubmit anything.
That's correct for those 13 or so that are existing.
Got it. Okay, so that needs to be maybe discussed more clearly because I think some of us thought that we would have to go reapply. So that's good news. Yes. Out of the 13, do we expect that there are going to be some state issues, things that are outside of our control, such as ADA, sanitation, et cetera?
I don't have specifics based on that, and I don't have building safety here with me tonight. But from discussions with them, a lot of the issues were very minor in bringing them into conformance. So it's really just a discussion and a clarification of the issues that need to be. For example, access for ADA compliance, the width of the aisle needs to be a certain compliance, and distance and egress from restaurants. So, but from what I understand, they're very kind of minor things that can be corrected relatively quickly.
Okay. Well, that's good news, because then hopefully there aren't major alarms being sounded that we won't be able to meet those code requirements. So that's good. So I don't see any major concerns. I think the approach makes sense. It seems like it's pretty flexible. The fact that we're keeping it low cost, we're not asking people to do new paperwork if you're already grandfathered in, essentially. We just got to make sure that we check against those codes. And if there aren't major issues, while I think we certainly can advocate for loosening all those state, code things, that if we don't anticipate it being an issue for the time being, perhaps we're fine.
second topic on parking. So like Jim Snyder, I actually welcome this discussion because I do think that clearly we've proven that we've operated with less parking. And if it has been a barrier to entry for a lot of these new businesses, I don't want to make sure that, the places in that article that was referenced in the staff report, Buffalo, New York, Nashville, Fayetteville, Alabama, places with far less transit, walkability, bike options have removed parking minimums. And so I think it's worth exploring this. Hopefully it's even an entree to discussing residential parking minimums, which I know is probably a bad word to talk about. But I welcome the discussion, especially for the sake of economic development and, for all the investments we're making in bike and ped and climate, frankly. This is one of the best things we can do at the local government level to actually impact climate change. I think it's timely to have this discussion, and I appreciate staff bringing it forward as part of the package. Thank you.
Ms. Hiscott.
Several things Letty just addressed. There was one red flag when you're discussing things that their state requirements, when you just kind of said tents. And in my mind, I'm picturing all the restaurants that have giant tents and heaters up that I've enjoyed and a lot of people have enjoyed. And that's something that's controlled at a state level over which we do not have the ability to change or control or provide. Is that correct?
There's certain requirements, and I'm not going to get into the details of each code because I don't know them very well. But from what I understand, tents are a fire code issue, and there's a limitation on how long tents can be standing. So they have to be inspected every 6 months in order for the tent to keep happening. And then if you put heaters in tents, that's a whole separate issue with fire code. So we're kind of trying to build that reinspection every 6 months to be kind of in conformance with the fire code if they have a tent. If they don't have a tent, obviously they don't have an issue. But
okay, so that having a tent is not necessarily the issue. It's whether you have heaters in them and the inspection cycle, which is...
They still need to meet the code.
Sure.
And like I said, I don't know each aspect of the code and the fire code, but we want them to be standing and safe, obviously. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So
if I could just interject, I think tents are a wildly useful thing, right? You see them all the time at weekend celebrations, at weddings, and they work really well, but they were never intended to be permanent buildings. So they're not really designed to have wiring. They don't work well with a lot of different heating elements in terms of their ability to withstand fire, whether or not they can stand up to strong winds and things. So they're not really intended to be permanent structures. They're intended by their nature to be temporary. And so certainly the state building code is permissive of them so long as they actually are temporary. So the state code actually requires them to come down every so often so that they don't become, in fact, permanent. That's actually one of the things I mentioned, I was trying to allude to earlier with businesses wanting to move to permanent outdoor seating venues, run wiring, run lighting, run heating. Folks may remember a couple of years ago, we worked with Ireland, the 4 Ps, at Barton, Washington, to successfully convert their canvas awnings into sort of proper sort of building materials for heating and lighting. And it's been very successful in terms of the activity in that outdoor bar area. And I think other restaurants want to do that. That's why we want to sort of try and get these permanent protections on the books.
Thank you.
Ms. Leon, did you have anything further?
My only comment, and my reaction on this was particularly for those businesses that are new, just consideration around user friendliness of the form. It's great that form is 10 fields. Like you're not making it 50, 50 fields. So it's easy enough. Make it online. And when I take a look at the requirements, around supplementary documents, it makes sense. I think the key thing that I read here is that you're anticipating a 2-week initial review. I think you just need to lock that down, right? And commit to some level of SLA so that we support, the business community that want to do this. I welcome the conversation on parking. I think I'm looking at the map and, if we've identified that as a barrier of entry for local businesses, I think it's really worth a conversation to explore, how we support viability of local businesses and helping them grow. It adds to our revenue base. We should talk about that. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks, Mayor Tarter.
All right. I've got a few comments. Did you have something? I have a few comments, questions, clarifications. So you talked about no minimum parking for a building of 20,000 square feet. Are you suggesting that if I wanted to build a 20,000 square foot building, I want to provide any parking at all?
So it's for commercial properties only, and I think it's supposed to be, the intent was supposed to be for older structures, older existing structures with surface parking. It was not meant to be for, I believe, and Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent was supposed to be for older structures, maybe pre-2000, that have 1.5 or 2 stories that have surface parking. It wasn't meant to be for new structures.
So what I would say is your zoning ordinance is going to be read by everybody kind of the same way. And so if you intend it one way, it's kind of hard to write it to say, well, new buildings have to have parking, everyone else doesn't.
Right.
So I would just say maybe speak with the city attorney, who happens to be very close by at the moment, to try to clarify that, because it's really hard to have one set of rules. You know, I know what you're thinking, which I kind of get, but I would say, as someone who's also an attorney, that it's hard in practice if you write it that way, because someone could say, I'm going to build a brand new commercial building. Thanks, I don't have to provide any parking at all, because you just changed the zoning ordinance to say no parking required for commercial buildings 20,000 square feet or less. So we want to make sure we don't have unintended consequences that trying to help existing older buildings, in turn, we end up creating a loophole that someone can build a building with absolutely no parking. So again, I would just say, spend some time on that. It could be that restaurant parking doesn't have to have extra parking. I'm not familiar with what the requirements are here. In many jurisdictions, it's based on number of seats, things like that, which is generally often more than office use is. And if you want to change that, if that's the real issue, then you could have a zoning ordinance amendment that just says, buildings of this size or the other, restaurants are treated as office for parking requirements. Something that's more targeted, as opposed to something that kind of opens the floodgates to no parking at all, which I think would be a bigger problem.
Well, I'm sorry, just to respond to that, one intent was that, for new developments, they would be able to come in and negotiate parking with a TDM or a parking management plan. This is meant for the ones that are existing buildings that are just looking for some relief. So I can clarify that in the zoning ordinance.
Well, I think it has to be, like a zoning ordinance has to be uniform for everyone.
Exactly.
And so I'd just be careful on that.
Okay.
Because you can build a by right building that they don't come in and negotiate anything, presumably, depending on how the zoning ordinance is written. Also, this may get to your ADA, but I think it's important also we have sidewalk minimums so that our outdoor seating doesn't just like hog up all the sidewalks so people can't pass safely or they have to walk in the street. And so it may be sort of touched on through ADA, but I think it's important to make sure that people can still pass and it's not, a 1.5 foot that everybody has to get by with a wheelchair or whatever. And so, again, maybe caught already, but I think that's important as well. One thing also that I would just be careful of is issuing permits that can never be revoked for any reason, because someone could be a chronic violator of things, that the noise is through the roof every day of the week, they don't respond and whatever. And so I think you need to have some kind of administrative fallback that, hey, you've been cited, yes, you've corrected it, but you've been cited 20 times, because most jurisdictions have some chronic offenders, and you don't want to give them a legal right to say, hey, sorry, you can't take away my outdoor seating. It's vested, and I can do whatever I want here. Come at me and fine me $100 or whatever. Anyway, long story short, I think you want to have some kind of relief so that if they're a chronic violator of noise, of safety, or of other reasons, that you can pull it. I think that's about all I've got. I'm certainly a supporter of outdoor seating. I just think we need to be careful to make sure that all the other things still work. And I do think that as COVID goes away, we may have things sort of coming back to the way they were before COVID, and so I think that's something to think about as well. But I think you're on the right track. Certainly appreciate all the good work. I don't know if anyone else has any last words, but anyway, appreciate your initial work here in the city and look forward to plenty more of that. Do we have a motion we'd like to make, someone would like to make? Oh, it's a work session. Sorry. Anyway, all right, Letty's got another comment.
So I thought we had 6 months from October 1st, Wyatt, from when we lifted the emergency. Is it actually going to end in February?
So the day after I started, September 27th, y'all approved a 6-month extension from that time to relax the COVID protocols, and then 6 months from that would be February 27th. So we can There is an option, I believe, if you'd like to extend it again while we're.
Okay. Well, keep us posted if you think as we finalize this, if we need more time, I think we're certainly flexible.
But isn't 6 months, March 27th? From September 27th?
Yeah, I thought it was March.
Is it March 27th?
Yeah, we do have another 30
Okay,
days.
great. March 27th.
We'll make sure that every day available is taken as necessary.
That helps me too, yes, no
The
problem.
related point, Wyatt, is that on Caroline's point, which is like, let's try to commit to some timelines so people know what to expect, especially if they need to do construction and after they file a permit, is do we have all the right resources to actually go out and do the inspections? Is that something that is going to be a barrier to keeping to reasonable timelines?
Obviously, we're going to have to work all those things out, and I think there would be a surge in the early days, and so we'd have to plan for that and resource for that appropriately, and then after that, I think it would become a fairly normal part of business.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, any final word on this matter? If not, let's move on to business not on the agenda. Do you have, what's that? Oh, God, I forgot. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's move on. Thank you again for your great work. Let's move on to our second work session item, which is the ARPA Multimodal Improvement Report. And is Zach Bradley going to do that, or who's doing that?
So Carrie O'Danino is walking up to the podium right now to give a presentation on this. And what we want to talk with the council is just prioritizing the use of the $1.5 million in ARPA funds that the council has already allocated. So there's no vote required on this, but we want to check in and make sure that the priorities we've identified here are aligned with the city council's priorities, and then move forward. Carrie, Ms. O'Danino, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Hi, I'm Carrie O'Danino. I'm a senior planner with the city. Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of City Council. So council is requested to review staff recommendations for American Rescue Plan Act multimodal improvements, consistent with the previously approved application for the use of the city's allocation of federal ARPA funds. Recommended project improvements include sidewalk missing links, crosswalks and ADA improvements, bus stop improvements, and speed limit signs. The total available funding, including local dollars, is around $1.5 million, with design and construction for the project slated for completion by fiscal year '25. No additional formal action by City Council is required. The City Council previously appropriated ARPA funds for this purpose in the fiscal year '23 budget. So in terms of methodology used to develop the proposed project list, projects were recommended that also aligned with the Council Work Plan Directive of Social Equity and Safe Routes to School. Specific improvements were recommended based on their relative ability to mitigate safety concerns and how quickly work could be completed. So for sidewalks, undergrounding of power lines and expansion of sidewalks to meet streetscape standards is recommended at the 412 West Broad Street frontage using local funds. In the South Washington Street Planning Opportunity Area, staff is recommending installing sidewalk on one side of Wallace Street between South Washington Street and Maple Avenue. On Hillwood Avenue, staff is recommending sidewalk missing links be installed between Brook Drive and South Roosevelt Street. For crosswalks and ramps, staff is recommending a crosswalk across Hillwood Avenue near the Aldi, and the replacement of 3 ramps is recommended at the intersection of Gibson and Shirley Street. All of the crosswalks requested in the Safe Routes to School Tiger Trail review are recommended, with the exception of those that included utility undergrounding. And I think in some instances we sort of took enough space behind the utilities if they were there. So those crosswalks are on Parker Avenue, South Virginia Avenue, Sherrill Avenue, South Oak Street, and Timberlane. For bus shelters, North Washington Street and Park Avenue, North Washington Street and Columbia Street, and West Broad Street and Virginia Avenue are recommended for the installation or replacement of bus shelters. And $100,000 is set aside for speed limit signs, and $100,000 is set aside for CIP staff salary. In terms of fiscal impact, per last year's adopted CIP, There are $1,233,000 in federal ARPA funds for fiscal year '23, which have to be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and fully expended by December 31st, 2026. And there are $167,000 in local funds available annually from fiscal year '23 to '28 for sidewalk and streetlights. And there is an additional $25,000 in residual local funds available from previous sidewalk missing links projects that can be used for the 412 West Broad Street sidewalk frontage item. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Leon?
Thank you. Carrie, may I get some clarity? I'm trying to cross-reference the project prioritization memorandum, particularly the pages that, like page 4, that highlights operations projects, particularly 2 that improve ADA compliance, and trying to reconcile it to this list. So for there's notion on the prioritization memo of reconstructing non-ADA compliant curb ramps at Douglas Avenue and Hillwood. Is that on here? Did it make it onto this prioritized?
For some of, and Zach or Tara could speak to this better, but for some of the ramps that are identified in that memo, they're sort of not as severe an issue as some other things that were identified.
So I think I'm trying to get a sense for in the prioritized list, which one of these increase ADA compliance, or are none of these things on the list increasing ADA compliance? Just trying to get a sense.
There's some really very out of compliance ramps at Gibson and Shirley. There's one ramp in particular that leads into a driveway, which is very, very out of compliance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you feel that this prioritized list is a good balance of that? Right? So I think there's, it's a tough one, right? You're trying to manage, how bad is it, right? Like the criticality based on how cost, how urgent is it in terms of a fix? And then we also talk about just making sure, the ADA compliance. So how did we filter through deciding what made this prioritized list? Maybe that's the larger question. I just need help with a little bit of an overview for the methodology for coming up with this.
Yeah, so we started out with a really comprehensive list of kind of everything that was in that prioritization memo, and then some other sidewalk missing links, and the Tiger Trail crosswalks review document. One of the issues that came up is that it's hard to just do individual ramps sort of in random locations, and that
make a commitment in one.
That it was more that it was easier to sort of just do a larger contiguous project.
Okay. And the notion of restriping any of the crosswalks, that did not make it on the prioritization list, even though it was on the prioritization memo. You're only looking at sidewalks. Well, actually, it says crosswalks, so we're not. When you say crosswalks and ramps, does that include some of the restriping that
The restriping would be in the operating budget.
Got it.
So I think this is all going to be new construction and new crosswalks where one doesn't exist right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Hardy, or Ms. Hardy, Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you for joining us, Carrie. So in general, this is really exciting because we put a lot of money towards kind of pedestrian improvements. I'll just preface by saying this is really good stuff. I had similar questions as Caroline, though, in terms of kind of how we are thinking about prioritizing it, because it is a big investment in kind of pedestrian safety. I want to make sure that we are thoughtful about kind of where we are putting the dollars, and it's not just the squeakiest wheels gets the grease. And so the reason I asked is I went back to some of the memos we've gotten from the CACT, and I know we have a member of the CACT here joining us tonight. January 2022, they sent us kind of recommendations on ped and bike improvements. In 2019, they sent us one as well. Were those sources of input into this process?
I didn't sort of personally review those. I'm not sure if Zach and Tara had those on their mind.
Because we kind of entrust the CACT to kind of be our eyes on the ground, right? To understand, like, hey, here are the really high pedestrian areas. Here's where we're having a lot of feedback of where we have issues. Here's where we want council to spend their resources. So I want to make sure we're not like creating multiple sets of lists and then reprioritizing and then missing the opportunities, especially when we had 7 residents out there actually giving us recommendations. So I guess my request is let's make sure we at least either go to the CACT meeting next or circle back with them and look at those. And some of them, I think, for example, I was thrilled to see that 412 West Broad made it to the plan because we've all asked about it. And I know that was actually on both the CACT memos I mentioned. So that was good that there's consistency there. They've asked for it, we've asked for it, so it's making it to the list. But I do want to make sure that if there were other places that they recommended as higher priority, because I know that as they thought about those, I remember in their kind of rubric, they thought about high commercial areas, and then an equity lens of where we had vulnerable users, whether that's pedestrians going to school or people going to work, and where that we may not have sidewalks on any side of the street. That maybe should get higher priority than places where we have a decent sidewalk on one side. And then obviously commercial areas where we might have a lot of users too. So those were some examples that I think a lot of thought went into those memos, and I want to make sure we don't lose those as we think about how to deploy $1.5 million really thoughtfully. The second question I had for, I guess, Wyatt is, while we have dollars to do the concrete, do we have people to do the work? Which is a question I've asked before. Because I think it's great that we have the money to set aside for this. Is that going to cover the staff costs as well, or are we thinking we would contract it out?
So there is a charge to staff costs in this list. This all would be contracted out, so the work is really just in the inspections and making sure the contractors are doing the right things. And so, yes, we can execute this. We will get back with you on the exact schedule on it, but we first want to sort of just touch base with you on the priorities here.
Great. And actually, when I was going through my notes, Noland had come to us, I want to say 2019 or maybe early 2020. They have no sidewalks on that entire side of the street. And I remember a bunch of kids came out and said, hey, this is an important sidewalk that we really want, and we couldn't fund it at the time. And so again, we need some sort of like master repository of bottoms-up requests we get from the community. Staff obviously knows a lot of the needs out there, but I feel like we've got multiple lists going, and I want to make sure that while we've got a significant amount of money, that we are deploying it against the highest value areas. So let's add Nolan to that if that needs to be revisited. Thank you very much.
Okay. I've got a question about the different ramps. You've mentioned in the report there's a number of them. In what sense are they defective? I mean, I guess my beef with the ramps we use is oftentimes there's just one and a diagonal in the middle. It doesn't connect with the two ways that someone in a wheelchair would actually be going. In other words, I'm crossing a street. Instead of having a ramp on both streets facing both ways, you just stick one in the middle that doesn't wrap the whole corner. And so if somebody's in a wheelchair, they're kind of stuck out in the middle of the road. Is that why they're deficient, or is there some other reason why there's a number of ramps in this report?
I believe that is a reason why, you don't want people just to roll straight into a travel lane. And so having those facing crosswalks instead.
I would certainly like to see that. I know I've walked the area with some of the people in the audience here as well, and it seems like we do that in many places where the ramp just like spits out at the diagonal. I don't know what's to save money. Like, well, we just put one in, and you guys figure it out. Once you get in the road, you'll turn the right way. But I think that's just really super unsafe, and I personally don't want to see those kind of ramps. I think they're a real danger, particularly people who have mobility impairments. And so I guess I would just ask that maybe as you go through this, that these replacement ramps actually are one for each crosswalk, not one in the middle, just sort of splitting the difference. Thank you.
Yeah, and the observation you just made is shared in the city's own ADA transition report, and so that is being kind of embraced, I think, by our transportation planners and engineers going forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else, Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, just to underscore comments already made by council members Leon and Hardy about the criteria used, and let's make sure we're hitting the areas where there's the greatest need. That we've looked at safety data, we've looked at CACT recommendations, so that the final list that we come up with really does the maximum for the maximum number of people. Thanks.
Okay, anything else, Mrs. Connolly?
As I look at this list of projects, it really does look like a large chunk of them are in the Tinner Hill neighborhood, which definitely has been underserved. There's a chunk on the Tiger Trail, which I personally am very appreciative of, but they also bring a lot of kids to school from several directions from that Winter Hill neighborhood, as well as the fields. So I think you have hit 3 of our neighborhoods that have been underserved, and I think that's really important. And then the mix of ramps and crosswalks is good. Just a question, and this goes back to a question I asked earlier, Mr. Shields, related to the sidewalk on West Broad Street, where the developer may be able to chip in some to widen that sidewalk there and make that area safer. Would that be something that the city has some funds in ARPA available, or Carrie, does this use every single solitary last fund we have? Is there any money left?
So for the full council's benefit, the developer at the Smoothie King, formerly the bank there at Lee and Broad Street, has contacted us about having sort of a cost share for sidewalk improvements there. So there's a couple things we need to think about. One is these are federal dollars, so the procurement rules are just going to be strict and they're non-negotiable. Secondly, we have a design spec for our streetscape. It would need to conform with that design spec. We really don't want a whole lot of variety for maintenance purposes. We need to make sure that it's being designed in terms of the foundation, the base, everything is per our spec as it is when developers put it in. So those are issues we need to work through. I'm not right now, it's just initial conversations, very confident that this is going to work because of the nature of the dollars we're dealing with. But we'll certainly have the conversation and see if there is a way.
It seems like a good opportunity to say this is the spec, and is there other funding available from capital reserves or excess recess surplus that we have?
So I think we were made aware of this, or at least I was made aware of this on Friday. So,
right, it's a very new.
So we need to work through some details on it. We have done this on kind of less traveled corridors, but because Broad Street has such a design, doing off design is something that we are going to, that would be problematic. But again, we've just started the conversation. We'll see where it can go. And some of my responses right now might not be fully well informed either. So give us just a little bit of time to work it through.
Mr. Duncan, did you have an additional comment?
I appreciate the manager's remarks and encourage further conversations. Obviously, we want to do it the right way. If there's a way to do it that saves the taxpayers some money, that would be great. Cost sharing is an opportunity, but understand there could be some obstacles. But, let's keep the conversation going. Just another question on timing. So all these pictures are great, and if we cured all these problems, this would be wonderful. As the note says, we have until December 31st, 2026 to finish this work, this much worth of money of work. So just to set public expectations, I mean, that's 3 years plus from now, almost 4 years from now, which is, the way it is. But just so people understand that a lot of work is going to take some time.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on this particular item? If not, thank you very much for that excellent staff report and your fine work on these multitude of projects. We look forward to seeing them come to fruition. Let's move on then to business not on the agenda. Are there any standing regional committee reports that anyone would like to make? Any council member comments or requests that haven't been made previously? Mr. Snyder?
Just a quick comment. The city's informed us that they believe they've made a mistake on the assessments of our property, so we're working with the city to determine what it is we legally owe. And as we have paid prior bills, we'll pay exactly what we're obligated to owe. So I've been asked to make that comment, and I'm making it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Just going to chime in on the minutes when it's time for that.
Okay, anything else before we get to minutes? All right, let's go to the minutes of September 12th, 2022. Mr. Duncan?
So lines 34 and 47 identify citizens who spoke without their addresses. Let's make a New Year's resolution to make sure we get everybody's address in the record when they come and speak to us or write to us. And other than that, the minutes look great. Line 235, I think there needs to be a "the" before the word temporary. But other than that, with those provisions, I would move approval of minutes of the meeting of September 12th, 2022.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Anything else anyone would like to say before we adjourn? Any final words? All right, we are adjourned. Good evening.